Chapter 1329. The Realm. After waking up, Roland stayed in bed for a while as usual before he reluctantly climbed out of the warm quilt. Anna had obviously woken up very early and devoted herself to her work. She had brought breakfast on the table. Roland lazily put on his coat and planned to go to the bathroom outside to wash up and then come back to fill his stomach. Unexpectedly, as soon as he opened the door, he saw a group of witches waiting outside. "Your Majesty." Roland could not help but feel a sense of déjà vu. There was no doubt that something big had happened in the Union for so many witches who did not participate in the war to gather here. But because he was still in the dream world, everyone was waiting for him at the door. Thinking that it was the winter of the months of demons, Nightingale and the others looked excited. He asked subconsciously, "Did someone evolve on the day of adulthood?" "It's Scroll. She's promoted to a transcendent." Nightingale replied excitedly. Following the group of chattering witches into the office, Roland saw the transcendent that everyone was talking about. Phyllis and Anna were also there. The three of them surrounded a stack of documents and seemed to be discussing something. Just by looking at Scroll's peaceful expression, he almost thought that the one who had advanced was one of the cheerful witches in front of him instead of the calm and steady teacher of the Union. "So, what's going on now?" he asked curiously. "Is Scroll really?" The three witches also noticed his arrival. Phyllis took the lead and said, "Your Majesty, I've repeatedly confirmed this with the stone of measuring. Her Excellency Scroll is probably the first non-combat transcendent in history. All the characteristics of her magic power are obviously different from before. Although this kind of improvement mostly varies from person to person, and there are no specific examples for reference, according to the convention of the Union, she is indeed qualified to be called a transcendent." "Don't call me Your Excellency." Scroll smiled and shook her head. "That won't do," Phyllis said seriously. "In the era of the Union, you might be a candidate for the three chiefs." "I'm already very impolite." "You also said that it was the era of the Union," Scroll interrupted. "In the Witch Union, everyone was a sister. Also, I prefer this kind of casual name." "All right, let's put these things aside for now," Anna interrupted. "Now that Roland is here, let's talk about Scroll's ability first. I thought you had already gone to the North Slope Laboratory." Roland smiled at her. The latter also winked slyly. "That was my original plan, but Scroll's ability is a little special, so I had to change the itinerary." "Special?" "Yes," Anna said word by word. She saw the dream world. After listening to Scroll's story, Roland's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you come back in the end?" "When I saw those magnificent city buildings, I suddenly thought of the dream world you described, and then I unconsciously felt a lot more at ease," Scroll slowly said. "After that, I returned to the hut where I first appeared, and tried to concentrate and imagine myself leaving this secret room. When I opened my eyes again, I found that I had indeed returned to the castle office." "Ah, I'm so jealous. Is that really the dream world? I also want to see it." The girls who were listening by the side could not contain their excitement, and as soon as Scroll's voice fell, they all began to shout. "Well, I think it's impossible for me to create such a magnificent world with my own ability," Scroll said with a smile. "As for whether it's the same dream world, perhaps Your Majesty will know the next time you enter the dream world." "No, I'm afraid it has nothing to do with ability," Roland muttered. "It has nothing to do with ability?" Phyllis said in surprise. "But Lady Scroll's magic power has indeed condensed. Advancement is only a prerequisite." Nightmare Lord Vaucrese's words echoed in his mind. When a person's understanding of magic power reaches a certain level, they will leave traces in the realm of mind, and even open up their own unique domain. This also coincided with what Lon had said. "Scroll, can you enter that sealed room again now?" "But you're not asleep." Scroll was stunned. "It's okay, just do as I say." Roland thought for a while. "If it works, try to open the iron door again. But no matter what you see, don't step out of the room, not even with your hands. Do you understand?" "I understand." Scroll took a deep breath, sat back behind the desk, and closed her eyes. "Do you think she's—" Phyllis obviously also noticed his intention. She was also present when he met with Valkyries. It's very likely. Roland nodded slightly. About a quarter of an hour later, Scroll opened her eyes again and revealed a look of surprise. Your Majesty, behind the door has become a red void. As expected, he had a basic understanding of the whole situation. That is the realm of mind, and also the true appearance of the origin of magic. And the small room you saw at first glance is your own unique domain in the realm of mind. Huh. Mystery Moon was puzzled. But didn't you say that the realm of mind is the crimson moon in the sky? They're just different expressions of the same thing. In fact, the realm of mind is in the bottomless land in the north of the continent. Roland briefly recounted the experience of the senior lord entering the dream world, being imprisoned, and being discovered by him, except for the information about Lon. This domain doesn't need to rely on the dream world to exist. It just happens to be within the range of the light beam of the key, so it's connected to the dream world. Wow. The group of witches let out a cry of surprise. I want to open a domain too. Mystery Moon clenched her fists. Come on, didn't you hear His Majesty say that apart from personal knowledge, it also has a lot to do with ability? Lily glanced at her. In other words, even if you read all the books written by His Majesty, whether you can succeed or not still depends on your looks. I think it's very difficult. Traitor. Roland looked at Scroll and exhorted. Although you can communicate with the realm of mind, try to open it within the light beam of the key, and connect it with the dream world. That place is full of all kinds of dangers. If it's in the dream world, at least the gods punishment witches and I can protect you. For example, the hostile gods and the oracles who brought corruption. Even if Scroll was promoted to a transcendent, her combat ability was still close to zero. Once she encountered an enemy, the danger was self-evident. Yes. Scroll was slightly dazed, and then revealed a gentle expression. She lowered her head and bowed. I understand. Then it's time to properly test this unique new ability, Roland said with a smile. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1330. It did not take too long to test the changes in Scroll's abilities after her advancement. In fact, before Roland arrived, she and Anna had already discussed most of it. The answer that appeared at the back of the arithmetic formula was not an illusion, nor was it a result of calculation. It was the result of searching the memory. As the data contained a large number of reused formulas, and Scroll happened to have seen them, the answers appeared directly in her mind. This was especially true for complex functions. If every small term was memorized, then the total term could be quickly solved even if one didn't understand the specific meaning of the formula. Compared to looking through examination papers and files, the amount of work involved was obviously much greater, and it was not impossible in the past. But now that she could do it subconsciously, it was obvious that her main ability had improved to a considerable extent. But for the content that she had not memorized or partially memorized, she would not be able to get any answers. Therefore, to calculate the reliability of the new design sample, it had to be done by the Design Institute and the central carrier. But if Scroll had read through it once, the workload would be reduced by a lot. The main focus of the test was still on the archive, in the realm of mind, although it was currently just a simple small room. The first thing to be determined was the rules of exchange between the two worlds. After all, as a transcendent, the way Scroll entered the dream world was fundamentally different from the gods' punishment witches and the Nightmare Lord. The former had to rely on the light beam to enter the dream world, while the latter had trespassed without permission, and even her body had changed. Scroll's method was more like connecting, like driving a car into a parking lot. Whether it was her body or consciousness, she maintained a relatively high level of integrity. If she could also take the goods in the parking lot with her, it would be very important. But reality proved that there was no such beautiful thing in the world. Scroll could bring the things she carried with her into the domain, but she could not bring the things in the domain or the dream world back to reality, not even a stone. Also, it was not entirely accurate to say that she had brought the items with her, because the test items did not disappear into thin air, but were still in her hands. Sorry, Your Majesty. After several tests, Scroll looked at her empty hands and said with some frustration, It seems that my ability is still not enough. No, this is within my expectations. You don't have to worry about it. Roland and Anna looked at each other, coming to a conclusion in their hearts. The archive was probably the same as the dream world. It more or less had the power to distort reality. As long as it was within Scroll's understanding, she would be able to replicate it. At first glance, it looked like she had brought things from the outside into the realm of mind. However, it was impossible to bring it back. This made Roland secretly heave a sigh of relief. After all, Scroll was not the only one who could open up a domain in the realm of mind. According to the information obtained from Valkyries, the king of the demons not only had the presiding Holy See, but also had a strong control over the domain. When it was in the domain, it was almost no different from a god. If the creations of the two worlds could be exchanged at will, the battle of divine will would obviously be filled with more risks and uncertainties. The next test was the tolerance of the domain. Ever since his conversation with Lon, he had guessed that the dream world was also a domain of the realm of mind, just that it was a little exaggerated. Although he could not summon the wind and rain in the dream world like the Demon King, the commonalities of domains should be universal, such as accepting consciousness. After Scroll's advancement, the light beam key expanded to about 1 meter. Although it was still a distance from the requirements of the Chosen One, she was already the fourth witch in Neverwinter, only inferior to Roland, Leaf and Evelyn. And this range of the light beam could accommodate 4 gods' punishment witches standing side by side. If the ancient witches entered the dream world because their light beams happened to be covered by the dream world's light beam, could they enter the archive in the same way? The result of the test greatly excited Roland. While he was awake, Phyllis relied on Scroll's domain to restore the appearance of 400 years ago. This undoubtedly verified his speculation. The outline of the realm of mind gradually became clear in his mind. However, the relationship between the number of people entering and the range of the light beam did not seem to be simple. Even if 4 gods' punishment witches closely stuck to Scroll and fell asleep, only one could reach the archive. Of course, it was enough for one person to enter. The final point was to locate the archive and determine its position in the dream world. If the high-rise building that Scroll saw was really a scene in the dream world, then she and Roland would definitely meet in the realm of mind. Just as the test was about to begin, Anna stopped Scroll. "Your Highness. Ever since I met Roland, I've never been envious of anyone, because I feel that this is the biggest gift in my life," she said slowly. "Even after knowing that the gods' punishment witches can enter the dream world, they have suffered too much, and the dream world is more like a kind of compensation for them. But now I'm really envious of you." She did not hide these words from the other witches, but said them in front of everyone, causing a commotion in the crowd. "Wow, why do I feel a little hot?" Mystery Moon hurriedly covered her face, but deliberately opened her fingers slightly, revealing 2 slits. "Be quiet, don't interrupt." Lily glared at her fiercely. "Anna." Roland could not help but say. Anna smiled at him, and then looked at Scroll. "So I have a request," Scroll said softly. "Please say it, Your Highness, as long as it's within my power." In the past, when he told me about the dream world, he only described it verbally without any pictures. "Can you replace my eyes and take a picture of the apartment he lives in, the places he often lives, and the scenery of that world for me to see?" Anna said seriously. "If you record the picture in the Book of Magic, I should be able to see it, right?" "Of course, leave it to me." "Wow!" Mystery Moon suddenly shouted. "I want to see it too. It's best if you can take a picture of the whole city." "Shut up." However, before Lily could stop her, the other witches also clamored. "Can you take a picture of the legendary plane that can carry hundreds of people? I want to see what a square that can accommodate tens of thousands of people looks like." Me too. Seeing that her sisters had surrounded Scroll and Anna, Lily stamped her feet and squeezed into the crowd. Nightingale sighed softly in the mist. This was probably why Anna was ahead of her. She could not help but smile bitterly. She clearly believed that her feelings for Scroll were no less than Anna's, but probably only Anna could say such words in front of so many people. Her courage was as bright as a jewel. With great difficulty, Scroll wrote down everyone's requests one by one and finally lay down on the soft chair in the office. Roland directly leaned against the mahogany table, intending to fall asleep like he did during his lunch break. Apart from the two of them, Phyllis, Ling and Faldy were also ready. Roland's gaze swept across the crowd and finally fell on Anna, who nodded gently at him. Then, let the 10th test begin. Chapter 1331. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Scroll took a quarter of an hour longer than before to calm herself down and capture the faintly discernible magical fluctuations in her mind. When she opened her eyes again, she was already in the narrow archives. Phyllis then appeared beside her, in the appearance of a young witch. Hundreds of years had not left any trace on her. Although Phyllis had lived far longer than Scroll, at this moment, Scroll was like an elder to her. What should we do next? Scroll asked. Leave it to me. Phyllis smiled confidently, then opened the iron door and walked out of the room. Scroll hurriedly followed her. The bustling grand city once again appeared in front of her eyes. Phyllis looked around and quickly locked her eyes on a young man who was walking toward her. She pulled Scroll's hand and directly stopped in front of the man. Hello. Hearing the greeting, the man stopped and looked away from a small box in his hand. He raised his head with a slightly puzzled expression, but the moment their eyes met, the man's eyes revealed an obvious look of surprise. What's the matter? I'm sorry, I lost my phone and can't contact my friend. Can you? I understand. Is $100 enough? The man quickly took out his wallet from his pocket and handed her a red note. At the same time, there was a hint of regret in his voice. So be it if you're cheated. But looking at your attire, the person who organized this must have put in a lot of money. Phyllis's smile suddenly stiffened. No, I just want to borrow your phone to make a call. The man was stunned for a moment before realizing that he had said the wrong thing. He awkwardly handed over the small box in his hand and apologized to the two. Phyllis shrugged and pressed a series of numbers. At this moment, Scroll still had not figured out the situation and did not know what to say. She could only pretend to be calm and stand where she was, but her heart was particularly nervous. This place was really too different from the world she was familiar with. A strong sense of strangeness was everywhere, like a wall that pressed down on her and made it hard for her to breathe. Many people around them had already noticed the two of them and swept their undisguised gazes in their direction. Among them, there was no lack of malicious intent. This reminded her of the exposed sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association. Don't worry, all they can do is watch. Phyllis seemed to have sensed her uneasiness. She tilted her head and comforted her. As long as you stare back, they will retreat faster than anyone else. At that moment, a beep came from the small box. Hello, is that Phyllis? It was the voice of His Majesty. In an instant, Scroll felt relieved. This was indeed the dream world. And His Majesty was not far from her. The sense of unfamiliarity was still there, but it wasn't as oppressive as before. Even the naked gazes that were cast at him were no longer as awkward and uncomfortable as before. Scroll took a deep breath and followed her gaze. Just as Phyllis had said, everyone avoided eye contact with her and turned their heads away guiltily. The crowd on the street seemed to move again. It's me. Lady Scrolls is right beside me. The address here was... Yes, that was what the map showed. Was it only 2 kilometers away from the apartment complex? That's great. Yes, I'll wait for you here, Your Majesty, brother. After ending the call, Phyllis threw the small box to the young man. Thanks. No, you're welcome. The young man hesitated for a while and then said hesitantly, can we add each other as friends? Phyllis casually told him a string of numbers. The young man recorded it down as if he had found a treasure, and then happily said goodbye to the two. The small box you borrowed just now, is it the wireless telephone that His Majesty always wants to communicate across thousands of miles? Scroll asked. Yes, the level of technology in this world has already popularized wireless telephones in everyone's hands. Not only can they make calls, but they can also locate directions and search for information. Without it, it's almost impossible to go anywhere. Phyllis explained, because of this, as long as you remember the number, you can contact the other person at any time. If you meet someone you don't want to talk to, you can directly refuse or give them a random number. I see. Scroll suddenly understood. No wonder His Majesty said that if the two of them were really in the same world, they would soon meet again. You, on the other hand, have adapted much faster than I expected. You're worthy of being a mentor of the Witch Union. Phyllis smiled. Scroll gently shook her head and did not answer. She knew where her courage came from. He was already a king, but he still didn't make any progress. Probably only His Majesty would say that the king should protect his subordinates, right? Really, how long will it take for him to become a qualified king? Scroll also felt the same. From the moment the Witch Cooperation Association was sheltered, she should have stood in front of the king. But until now she was still under his protection, which was really not a qualified performance. But if everyone was like this, it didn't feel bad. In that case, let's keep the status quo for a while longer. Hey, look at those two. That's a medieval robe. Are they playing Cosby? Speaking of which, the two of them are really beautiful. They don't look much worse than celebrities. Whispers could be heard from time to time, but Scroll no longer felt uneasy. About 10 minutes later, a round car stopped in front of the two of them. Sorry to keep you waiting. His Majesty poked his head out from the driver's seat. Get in. Phyllis opened the door and pulled Scroll into the car. Then, under the incredulous gaze of the onlookers, they swaggered off and disappeared into the traffic on the main road. We're really lucky. Ling, who was sitting in the passenger seat, turned around and said, if the connection point between Her Excellency Scroll's domain and the apartment are only 2 blocks away, Faldy's flying insects can monitor this area 24 hours a day. Faldy nodded. This area has been cleaned up before, and there are no signs of new fallen evils. Safety should be guaranteed. That's good. Roland smiled. So, as the first witch to enter the dream world on her own, how do you feel now, Scroll? Is this the car of the dream world? Scroll touched the chair behind her and knocked on the window. The seat is even softer than a sofa, and it's so quiet and fast. It's so much better than a steam-powered truck. It would be great if we could also build such a high-end vehicle. For some reason, she suddenly felt that Roland's smile was a little stiff, and the other 3 gods' punishment witches also pursed their lips, as if they were enduring something. Did I say something wrong? No, ahem, this day will come sooner or later. Roland cleared his throat. By the way, Your Majesty, where are we going? Scroll looked at the changing scenery outside the window and said, aren't you going to test the realm of consciousness? We can talk about that later. Haven't you noticed that the two of you are too eye-catching in your current clothes? Roland said without turning his head. Phyllis's clothes are in the car. You can change them later, but there's nothing suitable for you at the moment. Therefore, the most important task today is naturally to change your traveling clothes. Chapter 1332. Your Excellency Scroll, are you done changing? Ling asked outside the changing room. If you need my help, please don't hesitate to do so. No, it's fine, I will be done soon. Scroll's slightly nervous voice came from behind the partition. Roland could not help but raise his eyebrows. This was the first time he had seen Scroll reveal such an unstable mood. In the past, she was always calm and steady in everything she did. This also made him look forward to Scroll's appearance after she changed into a new set of clothes. Whoosh! The partition was pulled open and Scroll carefully walked out of the changing room. Is this okay? Roland's eyes suddenly lit up. Scroll was wearing a slim, dark blue turtleneck sweater, which perfectly displayed the contours of her upper body. On the outside, she was wearing a black and red half-length robe. The opening of the robe started from below her shoulders and extended all the way to her calves, giving her the charm of an evening gown. Her chest was open, forming an inverted V shape at the waist. Her towering chest and flat abdomen were half hidden, giving her an indescribable sense of beauty at first glance. Overall, her clothes were mainly in dark colors. There was no sense of frivolity at all. Instead, it looked extremely solemn. Coupled with the black-rimmed glasses on Scroll's face and her waist-length black braid, it added a mature and intellectual beauty to her. How beautiful, Phyllis exclaimed. Even among witches, it's enough to be praised. I told you I made the right choice. Ling's tone was rather proud. But isn't it too revealing? Scroll subconsciously covered her chest with her hands. Of course not. Isn't it wrapped up tightly? Faldy laughed. You can even accept the formal dress for the banquet, not to mention this improved version of the winter dress. And in the dream world, everyone wears it like this. Am I right, Your Majesty? Ling joined in. Roland chuckled and shook his head. Although there was underwear and a long sweater underneath, this kind of jacket with the top and bottom split was indeed not suitable for her usual robes. The key is not how other people wear it, but Scroll's own opinion. He paused and looked at Scroll. Do you think you like this set of clothes? Scroll looked at herself in the glass mirror. She had never seen this appearance before. Even if there was a huge difference between the two worlds, something like beauty would always be able to transcend countless gaps and resonate with people's hearts. She couldn't deny that she liked her current outfit. Yes, Your Majesty, she replied softly. That's good. Roland called the shop assistant over. I'll take the whole set. Sir, you really have good taste. These are the latest models for this winter, and they are a perfect match for this lady. The shop assistant took out a calculator and pressed for a while. A total of 24,000 yuan. Please pay over here. Roland held his breath for a moment. That was almost a third of the price of a minivan. However, since he had already boasted, it was too late to back out now. He tilted his head to look at Ling. How did you choose your clothes? I chose the ones with the biggest numbers on the labels. Ling stuck out her tongue. My classmates at school always say that only price doesn't lie. Roland couldn't help but facepalm. Your Majesty, are these clothes very expensive? Scroll leaned over and asked in a low voice. Why don't we just forget about it? I'm the creator of the dream world. How can I be stumped by money? It's a piece of cake. He pretended to be indifferent and bought the clothes. Next, let's have dinner on the second floor of the mall. Yes. The three gods' punishment witches cheered in unison. Your Majesty, what about the test? Don't worry. Roland waved his hand. Time passes faster here, so it won't take long. Besides, it's your first time in the dream world. Of course, you should enjoy yourself first. Tell me what you want to eat later. Anyway, I've already paid for it. It won't cost me much to eat later. I might as well let everyone be happy, he thought. Scroll looked at the four people who were in high spirits and shook her head helplessly. I understand. By the time they walked out of the bustling mall, everyone was already burping from eating. Under Roland's lead, the group of people swept through almost all the restaurants in the city, and when they saw something good, they would order it. From the piping hot crab roe buns to the ice cream mixed with nuts, every single dish was incomparably delicious to Scroll. Although some of the food could be found in Neverwinter, compared to here, it was like comparing His Majesty's small car to a steam truck. Even though she tried her best to control herself, she could only maintain a good table manners. This kind of world is really good. Scroll murmured as she strolled along the spacious street and gazed at the deep night sky. Even though all the stars were covered, the city was still brightly lit. Street lamps illuminated the streets, and snowflakes danced under the soft lights, like fairies decorating the night sky. The city is bright and beautiful, and everyone's face is brimming with smiles. It looks like a dream. Will we be able to build a reality like this one day? Of course, as long as we have enough knowledge. Roland said as he walked with his hands behind his back. This is also the biggest difference between the two sides. Border Town can be transformed into Neverwinter through knowledge, so Neverwinter can also become the dream world one day. And the key to starting this process is right in front of you. In front of me? Scroll was startled. That's right. Roland raised the corner of his mouth. The reason why he brought Scroll here was not just to shop. After crossing the road, the group stood in front of a beautiful building. There was a golden plaque hanging on the main entrance, on which the words Municipal Library were written. Scroll could not help but exclaim as they entered the library. The spacious hall was the size of the central square of Neverwinter, and it led straight to the top of the building, which was more than 10 meters high, like a transparent patio. The escalators in the surroundings moved people up and down, while the 5 levels of corridors surrounded the hall in layers. Countless bookshelves were lined up in a row, and every bookshelf was filled with books. Obviously, all the books in Grey Castle. or even all the books in the Four Kingdoms combined could not compare to the collection here. Scroll involuntarily put her hand on her chest. She obviously understood why His Majesty brought her here. This is a place you will definitely come to in the future. Roland smiled. Bring the key to that world for me. She took a deep breath, bowed her head to Roland, and said solemnly, I will not let you down. This was bound to be a time-consuming task, and it was difficult to see any results in a short period of time. But change always started from such a small place. Knowledge was like nourishment. As long as it was sprinkled, it could catalyze people's growth. He had been pushing for this matter to progress, and it was also for this purpose that Ling and the others were sent to school. Scroll's advancement would undoubtedly greatly accelerate this process. As the saying goes, it takes 10 years to grow trees, and 100 years to nurture people. Roland believed that in 100 years, the people in the real world would inevitably undergo earth-shaking changes, whether they were people without magic or witches with witches. At that time, they would use their own hands to create a brand new dream world. Chapter 1333. Late at night, Roland drove them back to Lioli Pavilion, which was the street where Scroll had first entered the dream world. Like the Tongzi district, it was an old street, but compared to the former, it was more commercial in nature. On both sides of the street, there were many convenience stores, greenfly restaurants, KTV shops, and internet cafes. They were not big, and the main customers were office workers and students in the neighborhood. Although the environment looked dirty and messy, it was suitable for Scroll to hide her identity. The entrance and exit of the connection point was on the side of the street. From the outside, it looked no different from an ordinary iron gate. As for whether this gate had originally been here, or only appeared after Scroll entered the dream world, Roland did not know. However, this location was obviously very important. He was already considering whether to use the relationship between the association and the Clover Group to buy the shops on both sides. After all, Scroll's realm of consciousness could only carry one god's punishment, which, if she was targeted by more than one fallen evils, she would still be in danger. As a key figure in passing on knowledge, she obviously could not take any risks. If he could station a dozen combat witches around the connection point, it would undoubtedly be safer. While the crowd was thinner, Roland did a final test on the interaction between the two realms of consciousness. When the dream world stopped operating, no matter where Scroll was, she would be expelled from the dream world and returned to the small archive. This was also the biggest difference between her and the God's Punishment witches. Although the God's Punishment witches' consciousness would return to their own bodies, their position in the dream world would be fixed at the moment they left. This was also the reason why Roland asked them to enter and leave the dream world together at the Rose Cafe, or the warehouse next door. Otherwise, when there was a change in personnel, someone might disappear into thin air. Scroll's problem was obviously more serious. At least in an emergency, the God's Punishment witches could maintain a seamless connection with Roland when entering and exiting the dream world, but Scroll could not do this. This also meant that every time she entered the dream world, she had to start at the archive and end at the archive when she left the dream world. However, considering that as long as Scroll was taught to use a mobile phone, she could always ensure that they were in the right position before waking up from the dream world. Plus, Faldy's magic bug was always monitoring the area, so it was not a difficult problem to solve. This law also holds true in reverse. When Scroll voluntarily left her realm of consciousness, both the God's Punishment witches and Roland would be forcibly expelled. The former would return to her body in reality, while the latter would appear in front of the iron gate. It wasn't a good feeling. It was like riding a roller coaster. The last point was beyond Roland's expectations. After Scroll left the realm of mind, the iron door was still there, but behind it was neither a wall nor the narrow gray room, but a red void. That was the symbol of erosion. According to Garcia, the erosion crevice was not something that could be seen everywhere. The places where it existed would usually be guarded by the association's commissioner. In other words, this erosion should have been brought by the archives. As expected, the relationship between the realm of mind was not simply one of containment and accommodation. Roland realized that they were all a part of the realm of mind, and used the power of the origin of magic. This was probably the most appropriate explanation. This was in line with what Lan had said. As long as the dream world devoured more cores, he would have the opportunity to invade the domain of God. Another question popped up in his mind. If the realm of consciousness of other senior demons entered the range of his light beam, what would happen to the dream world? Could they also appear in this city like the scrolls? The next day, Roland received the latest news from the front line. There were 2 letters in the envelope. One was written by Vendi. The letter briefly described the current situation of the witches, and the second half focused on Nana Pine. The little girl, who had followed the witch union all the way, had finally welcomed her day of adulthood. Like Lucia, Mystery Moon and the others, her magic power had condensed at the moment of adulthood. According to the union's classification system, she could be considered a real senior witch. The letter didn't explain the specifics of Nana's ability. Maybe everyone was too busy, or maybe Nana's magic power was too precious to be wasted on the test. But Roland didn't care about that. For him, the most important thing was that Nana had safely crossed the threshold. The other letter was much thicker. There were reports from the First Army and proposals from the General Staff Department. This was also a major drawback of the current information transmission channels. In order to save transportation resources, the front line would often wait until a certain number of things needed to be reported before sending it back to Neverwinter. Therefore, even though it was the same letter, some of the contents would differ by a few days or even half a month. Flipping to the end, Roland suddenly frowned. What happened? Nightingale, who was guarding at the side, asked. The demons launched an all-out attack on the First Army, he said in a low voice. Just a week ago. Gust Castle, Kingdom of Wolfheart. The shrill alarm rang through the city again. This was the 3rd time since sunrise. Damn monsters, don't they know fatigue? Jotl spat on the ground and took out a paper bag from his pocket. He poured it for a long time but could not pour out anything. Here. A hand suddenly stretched out from beside him. This is what you're looking for, right? Jotl tilted his head and realized that the speaker was Fairy. She handed him a small white pill. You don't need this? He picked up the pill hesitantly. I'm not as weak as you. It's just a day or 2 without sleep, Fairy replied expressionlessly. And I hate these things. Who knows what they're made of? I advise you to eat less. Maybe you're right. Jotl let out a long breath and tossed the pill into his mouth. But at least it can keep me alive for now. When the pill dissolved on his tongue, an extremely bitter taste quickly filled his mouth. At the same time, the bone-piercing chill in the air and the dizzying tiredness and exhaustion seemed to have been swept away. Even his stiff fingers and limbs became flexible. He felt that he had once again become a sharp hunter, and not an exhausted prey waiting to be slaughtered. This was the feeling. Jotl raised his spear and placed it firmly in the shooting position. These pills had only been distributed to every soldier as a ration half a month ago. Its official name was Delaying Agent, but everyone preferred to call it Tumbling Pill. Just one pill could completely block out the body's pain, and it would only explode after a few hours. Although some of the Sand Nation people were quite resistant to this drug at first, and even associated it with the legendary Pill of Madness, such voices soon disappeared. The reason was that the First Army did not force the use of Delaying Agent. Furthermore, the characteristics of the side effects were clearly stated on the packaging, and it was forbidden to take it continuously. This was completely different from the rumors Jotl had heard about Princess Tartara. Other than the Sand Nation troops, the Northerners also received the Delaying Agent. Even the officers were no exception. This also dispelled most people's suspicions. Some people even said that the medicine could have been made fragrant and sweet, but to prevent people from eating it like a snack, they added a bitter taste. And when the demons started their frenzied attack, this white pill instantly won the trust of all the soldiers. Facing the enemy's attacks from dawn to dusk, Jotl could not imagine how he could last dozens of hours in this kind of high-intensity battle, with almost no rest without the Delaying Agent. As an experienced hunter, he naturally understood the difference between fighting in perfect condition and fighting continuously with exhaustion. As long as he did not die immediately after taking it, he could accept any serious side effects. Chapter 1334. On the other hand, someone like Fairy who strongly rejected the tumbler pill seemed like an anomaly. But seeing that he was in good spirits, Jodl didn't think too much about it. It was difficult to even protect oneself on the battlefield, not to mention others. It was already the 8th day since the start of the battle. 8 days ago, their defensive line was still outside Gust Castle, the crossfire of machine guns and cannons making it difficult for the demons to advance. But as time passed, traces of the enemy appeared in all directions of the defensive line. Huge skeletons began to pierce the area between Gust Castle and Metalstone Ridge, turning the weakly defended area into a red fog zone. The aerial knight tried to stop them, but it was to no avail. When the demons used these fortress-type monstrous beasts to surround them from both sides, the cannons' attacks were scattered. To prevent the army from being surrounded, they retaliated while retreating to the rear. The next step was to repeat the process. The enemy's attack was like an endless tide, and everyone felt great pressure. The rest time was also reduced from the normal rotation to 4 to 5 hours. Although there were several reinforcements from the rear, the gap in the number of people was so big that it was obvious at a glance. There were no more than 2,000 soldiers at the front line, and the demons' attacks were all above 20,000. The devil beasts even bypassed the defensive line and charged in the direction of the Cage Mountain. Even though they couldn't understand the situation there, it was clear that the rear was not safe either. And just 3 days ago, the frontline troops received the order to retreat into the city. At the same time, the demons' attacks on the west suddenly intensified. This was undoubtedly a signal. The Metalstone Ridge to the west of the First Army had probably fallen, and now it was their turn. A day later, the enemy broke through the front line for the first time and engaged the soldiers in close combat. At this point, the battle had completely become a battle of wills. Jodl cast his gaze towards the dilapidated short wall a few hundred meters away. The outer wall of Gust Castle was now riddled with holes. The corpses of demons hung from it, and the blood that flowed out caused the wall to be dyed with a layer of eerie blue. And the distance from the short wall to the defensive line was like purgatory. Soldiers and berserk demons were mixed together, half of them buried in snow, the other half frozen in the cold wind, like naturally formed statues. Due to the continuous attacks of the enemy, they didn't even have time to collect the dead. Bone spears and stone needles were stuck on both sides of the long street, like barbs growing out of the earth. Since not everyone could hide in the fortifications, every time it rained needles, it was a lucky draw for the soldiers hiding in the houses and trenches. One of them pierced through the wall of the room and landed less than a meter away from him. If he had been a little more biased, he would have already gone to serve the 3 gods. Bah! Jodl shook his head and threw these inauspicious thoughts out of his mind. When the clan was in danger, no matter how many times he prayed to the 3 gods, he never received a response. This time, naturally, it was not the 3 gods' protection. Perhaps he would eventually die in this foreign city, but before that, he would definitely make the enemy pay a painful price. The great chief had promised that he would not mistreat any clan that had fought for the fate of mankind. That was his purpose for coming here. They're here, Fairy warned. There were no sounds of cannons. The artillery position had been completely silent last night. Some said that it was a sneak attack by devil beasts, while others said that the artillery had moved ahead of time. But no matter what, they could only rely on themselves to defend against the enemy now. The figures of the demons finally appeared on top of the wall. The first to open fire was still the machine gun squad. Other than the longsong cannons, the loud and continuous sound of the machine gun was the most pleasant sound in the soldiers' hearts. The flying bullets scattered the snow beside the wall. The first demon that climbed over the wall was instantly shot down, and the demon that followed closely behind it also had their skulls blown off by the rain of bullets. Gunshots also rang out from the east and west sides of the city. This was clearly another fierce siege. Jodl didn't care about the demons charging directly into the firing line. Instead, he focused his attention on the streets around 100 meters away. After 3 days of defending the city, he had already understood one thing. The most dangerous place was often not the place where the firepower was focused, but the seemingly quiet street corners. At this moment, the First Army no longer had a fixed line of defense. The troops were scattered around the blockhouses in groups. Their most important task was to prevent the demons from sneaking close to the permanent fortifications. Even if he wanted to attack the enemies hundreds of meters away, it would be difficult for him to accurately hit them. Suddenly, 5 or 6 mad demons appeared on the roof of a 2-story mud building. They seemed to be planning to use the building to bypass the area with the most firepower. This action completely exposed them to Jodl's gun. He held his breath, aimed at the demon walking at the end, and pulled the trigger. The target fell in response. Fairy and the other 2 teammates followed suit and opened fire. The fragile wooden roof couldn't support the mad demon's large movements at all. As they climbed slowly, they became the most eye-catching targets. 4 o'clock. A large number of demons have been spotted in the 4 o'clock direction. Before they could finish off this small group of escaped demons, a sand nation behind them cried out in alarm. "They're coming this way. Leave this place to me," Fairy shouted. "You guys go deal with the other side." Jodl immediately turned his gun around and ran to another window. The most accurate shooter among his teammates was undoubtedly Fairy. If he said he could finish off the remaining demons, then there would definitely be no problem. But when he saw hundreds of demons swarming towards their hiding place, Jodl's heart sank slightly. "Damn it! Were those guys just now testing us?" someone exclaimed. "I'm afraid so." He immediately made a judgment. "Everyone, don't conserve your ammunition. After we finish off this wave of demons, move towards the 6 o'clock direction." Concentrated gunshots instantly rang out from the window. Among them were the new automatic weapons issued by the troops. Compared to the roar of the Mark I type, the new weapon, known as the general-purpose machine gun, had a crisper sound, but its firing rate was no slower than those huge monsters. The only drawback was that its magazine could only hold 30 rounds, so its suppressive ability was inferior to the former. But the enemies clearly didn't expect that the top of a small clock tower could explode with such astonishing firepower. Under the head-on attacks of the general-purpose machine gun and rocket launchers, more than half of the hundreds of demons were instantly killed, while the remaining enemies raised their bone spears. "Pay attention to the spears," Jodl warned loudly as he suddenly crouched down. Dozens of bone spears shot out like arrows from a bow, piercing the top of the clock tower in the blink of an eye. Clang! The copper bell that was struck let out a series of buzzing sounds. If it was on flat ground, it would be difficult to escape from this attack. However, the difference in elevation formed a natural concealment area. Even if the bone spears shot from below filled the windows, it would be difficult for them to hit the soldiers lying on the ground. The gunshots only stopped for a moment before resuming again. The remaining mad demons were caught in a dilemma. They were almost certain that they would be able to finish off this small team of enemies. Jodl couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He also felt a little regretful. He heard that the general-purpose machine gun was expensive, and it had to be used by the Air Knight first. If the frontline troops had won, even if they didn't rely on the cover, the demons would still be no match for them. But at that moment, Fairy suddenly screamed, "Oh no, get out of here!" He was stunned, and instinctively turned his head to look. There was a breach in the city wall in the distance. A huge spider demon climbed over the wall and crouched down. It opened the shell on its back, and the dark stone pillar faintly glowed. Wait, could it be aiming at them? Jodl raised his head. The copper bell hanging on the beam of the roof was still trembling slightly. Damn it, it was the bell just now. He picked up his gun and ran down the stairs. And at the same time, a light chime came from afar. Bang! Before he could run down the first floor, the black stone pillar that was thicker than a human flew in a high parabola and smashed straight into the middle of the clock tower. With a loud rumble, the entire tower collapsed. Chapter 1335. Cough, cough, cough. Amidst the billowing dust, Jodl coughed as he slowly climbed up from the ground. Debris was still falling from the ceiling, and only a small part of the building that had been standing tall a moment ago was now left with only a small part of the bottom. Fortunately, the collapsed beams and the foundation of the wall formed a narrow shelter for him, and he was able to survive. "Is there anyone alive?" He shouted with great effort, but the dust quickly blocked his mouth. Clearly, it was unlikely that his teammates had heard him. Jodl had no choice but to crawl through the cracks between the beams and the stones towards the light above. With the help of the dim light, he could see a few broken pieces of wood stuck in his arms and thighs. Blood seeped out and dyed his military uniform red. The delaying agent had undoubtedly played a key role again. If it hadn't blocked the pain, he didn't know how long it would have taken for him to recover from the fall. With great difficulty, he crawled out of the ruins. Jodl suddenly realized that several demons were less than 10 meters away from him. They were clearly the troops that had charged straight for the clock tower. If the spider demon's attack had come a little later, it would have only been a matter of time before they were wiped out. But now the situation had been reversed. The purpose of the enemy's encirclement was self-evident. They were planning to eliminate any survivors who might have escaped. Jodl didn't hesitate too much. He knew that his chances of leaving alive were slim. The bolt rifle could only fire one bullet at a time, and with the mad demon's skills, they were enough to tear him to pieces in the time it took for him to pull the bolt. Even so, he still decisively raised his gun. To the Sand Nation, death wasn't scary. What was scary was not being able to see hope. His death could be exchanged for the continuation of his clan, so that his wife and children could eat their fill. That was enough. The moment he fired, Jodl couldn't help but think of the moment when he had resolutely submitted to the Great Chief while bearing the heavy pressure of the Iron Sand City's large clans. That night, he had also charged towards the Wild Wave and Cutbone clans with the determination to die. One of the mad demons fell to the ground with the sound of the gunshot, and the other three quickly pounced towards him. At this distance, sharp claws were more effective than throwing spears. In the blink of an eye, a large open hand stretched out in front of him. If it had grabbed him, half of his face would have been crushed. It was also at this moment that Jodl suddenly felt that his body was no longer under his control. His body leaned backwards, dodging this fatal attack at an unbelievable angle. Then, using the gun handle as a fulcrum, he suddenly leaped backwards, borrowing the momentum of falling backwards to soar into the air, completing a beautiful backward roll. By the time he landed on the ground, the second bullet had already been pushed into the barrel. What was going on? Jodl was completely stunned. Was it the side effect of the delaying agent? But not only did he not feel the pain from the superimposed pain, his movements were even more agile, except that none of this was out of his will. Even though he was in a daze, his body showed no signs of stopping. The demon roared as it charged forward. The Sand Nation's hands held the gun steadily. The moment the gun was fired, the muzzle was already pressed against the demon's head. Bang! The enemy's head exploded. The second mad demon was already in front of him. As if it had learned its lesson, it didn't pounce on Jodl immediately. Instead, it pulled out its bone spear and swung it horizontally. The only thing the latter could reach was the gun in his hand, and that was exactly what his body did. The result was that due to the huge difference in strength, the gun was directly sent flying and landed in the ruins with a clatter. Just when Jodl thought that everything was over, his body once again did something unexpected. He straightened his body and directly crashed into the mad demon's chest. His right hand pulled out the bayonet at his waist. This time, the bayonet went from bottom to top, piercing through the enemy's helmet from the chin. Red mist instantly gushed out. By the time the enemy wrapped its arms around him and wanted to take him down with it, Jodl had already slipped out of the enemy's grasp like a loach. The mad demon staggered 2 steps, and finally knelt on the ground. Defeating a demon whose physical strength far surpassed a human's in close combat was something Jodl had never imagined. But now not only did he do it, he even killed 2 of them in one go. The last remaining mad demon finally raised its bone spear. But its target wasn't Jodl, but a broken wall in the ruins of the clock tower. The spear pierced through the wooden window on the wall like lightning. A short figure cried out in surprise and fell out from behind the broken wall. It was Fairy. The mad demon completely ignored its withered arm and ran towards him. Jodl also couldn't help but change his direction and charged straight towards the enemy. The 2 of them reached Fairy at almost the same time. The moment the mad demon attacked, Jodl's military knife also pierced through the enemy's throat from behind. Red mist splashed out from the wound and sprayed onto Fairy's raised arm. His companion let out a shrill scream, and Jodl suddenly realized that he had regained control of his body. "Don't tell me you're..." Looking at his opponent's rapidly rotting arm, he suddenly understood. Why are you here? Unlike the churches in the north, the Majins didn't see witches as symbols of evil. Instead, they saw witches as goddesses with extraordinary power. Because they were few in number, clans that had goddesses were usually potential replacements in charge of Iron Sand City. Jodl had once heard of a tribe called the Sandstone Clan. Under the leadership of their goddess, they followed the Queen of Clearwater on an expedition to the distant north, never to return. And that goddess was called Kabbalah, and her ability allowed her to command others to work for her. But they didn't receive the rewards they deserved. The departure of a large number of young adults caused the Sandstone Clan to collapse, and the women and children who remained in the southernmost region were swallowed up by other clans. It wasn't until the Great Chief re-established the laws and regulations of the desert that the name of this clan was preserved. Superb combat skills, an uncontrollable body, and Majin background. After witnessing this unbelievable scene, he couldn't think of any other reasonable explanation other than the Sandstone Goddess. But now was clearly not the time to think about it. He took out a roll of bandages from his waist pouch and bound Fairy's arm tightly. Then he used a knife to scrape off the festering skin. Then carried Fairy on his shoulder and ran in the direction of the permanent fortifications. Don't tell anyone about this. His teammate's soft murmur came from behind. But, I beg you, Fairy interrupted weakly. Jodl hesitated for a while, then nodded slightly. All right, I won't say anything. The sounds of gunfire continued to come from all around them, but the frequency had decreased by a lot. He saw that the spider demon that had charged into the city had half its body blown away by a field cannon, and was now completely paralyzed. After entering the inner city, someone would jump out from hiding every few steps, taking turns to cover their retreat to a safe area. When Sky Knight's figure appeared in the sky, Jodl knew that they had finally blocked another round of attacks from the demons. Perhaps the next clash would be the garrison's last defense, but at least for now, victory still belonged to them. But to Jodl's surprise, half an hour later, all the troops received new orders to abandon Gust Castle and retreat towards the western exit of the Cage Mountain. Chapter 1336. Sir, my subordinates have reported that the Gust Castle has been captured by us not long ago. Those insects are fleeing towards the south. A junior knelt on one knee and said loudly, You've done well. I will report this contribution to His Excellency Sky Lord. Totolok nodded approvingly. Don't worry about the defeated soldiers for the time being. Continue to cut the insects' front line to the east until they are utterly defeated. Yes. This war will give you more than one chance to advance. Make good use of this opportunity and use their blood to exchange for honor. This subordinate understands. After the junior ascendant left, Totolok sneered and looked at the map provided by the human aristocrat. The insects are nothing more than this. Sir Hacksword is worrying too much. Their traps might work once or twice, but they wouldn't work every single time. In the end, the outcome of a war is decided by direct force. Even if their resistance is much stronger than it was 400 years ago, it still can't make up for the overall gap between the races. But our losses are not small either. The antennae under Siassi's chin hissed. We've lost nearly 40,000 warriors in 8 days. Over 30% of our frontline troops have already been lost. If we continue fighting like this, there might be a gap in our follow-up forces. So what? Stubbornly resisting in the early stage and collapsing in the later stage. Isn't this the usual behavior of the insects? In the battle of divine will, only a strong race that can withstand more casualties will be able to win the final victory. Now that the western part of the kingdom of Wolfheart has fallen into my hands, how long can the remaining 2 cities last? When we surround them from all sides, they will soon lose the will to fight, just like now. Xyaxis did not refute. Although the strength of the humans' resistance was somewhat beyond its expectations, it still agreed with the other party's view. After all, it had seen too many stalemate situations suddenly collapse, just like the seemingly solid surface of a frozen river shattering in an instant. The cause was usually just a crack. Humans always put up the strongest resistance at the beginning, but as the number of casualties continued to increase and they failed again and again, They would gradually lose confidence, and there would be internal divisions. In the end, they would completely lose the will to resist. In the early stages, the tribe would suffer more casualties than the enemy, but as long as the pressure continued, the situation would be reversed. Towards the end, it would not be an exaggeration to say that humans would flee at the sight of the wind. This was not simply a matter of courage. Just as Totolok had said, it stemmed from the fundamental difference between the two races. They needed a lot of rest, food, warm blankets, and shelter from the wind, but these were conditions that were difficult to achieve during the war. It had carefully studied humans before, and even without seeing them with its own eyes, it could imagine how terrible their current situation was. After several days of continuous attacks, using the primal demons as consumables, and with their advantage in numbers, it was impossible for the humans to get enough rest under such conditions. Their mental state was definitely on the verge of collapse. As for sufficient food and shelter, it was impossible for them to even think about it. These unfavorable conditions would continuously wear down their morale, and the news of the fall of Metalstone Ridge and Gust Castle would spread among the army sooner or later. How long could Sand City and Sedimentation Bay hold out when the two factors were added together? On the other hand, the race did not need these things. Regardless of whether it was food or rest, they could use the life mayflies to solve everything. The crueler the war, the more obvious this advantage was. Siasis agreed with Hacksword, but it firmly believed that victory would ultimately belong to the race. Humans, not insects, had already done enough. I will bring the news of our victory back to Sky City. I will leave the rest of the attack to you for now, it said. Don't underestimate the other party. Strive to occupy the kingdom of Wolfheart with our current strength. At this time, we should not add too much burden to the rear. Totolok exhaled a breath of hot air. Don't worry if we don't have enough troops. I will personally fill in the gaps. After retreating to a safe area, Jodl slept for more than 10 hours. When he woke up, he felt weak all over, and his stomach was a little uncomfortable from hunger. He instinctively wanted to feel for the dry rations in his waist bag, but found that the clothes on his body had been changed into new ones, and the familiar rifle by the bedside was no longer there. There were 10 or so wooden beds in the tent, but they were all empty. This was the battlefield medical center? It was probably because he had fainted and looked too scary because of the side effects of the delaying agent, which was why he was sent here by his teammates. He wondered how Farley was doing. In order not to expose her identity, she endured the pain and damaged her wounds to the point that they were unrecognizable. Even if it wasn't life-threatening, it would probably take a long time for her to recover. Once he thought that the comrade he had been with for more than half a year was actually a goddess, Jodl felt his cheeks heat up. When he had retreated from Gust Castle, he clearly hadn't thought about this. But this bit of restlessness and apprehension was quickly dispelled by a strong sense of hunger. If he didn't quickly eat something, he suspected that he could collapse again at any time. Jodl slowly climbed up from the bed and dragged his weak body out of the tent. Unexpectedly, just as he lifted the curtain, a thick smell of meat wafted into his nostrils. The smell was so tempting, it was like a delicacy from heaven. You're awake? A nurse quickly noticed him. Didn't the higher-ups say that you can't take delaying agents in succession? You can't take the delaying agent in succession. If you take one more, you might not wake up. You must be starving now. I'll take you to the canteen. Following the nurse into a large tent, Jodl almost couldn't believe his eyes. He saw 7 or 8 iron buckets lined up on the long table, filled with steaming hot food, from steaks to soup, everything. Everyone lined up in a row, carrying their lunch boxes past the long table, and when the buckets were more than half full, someone would pour in new buckets. Without a doubt, these meals were all made on the spot by the logistics department. But isn't this too extravagant? As a Majin hunter who often cooperated with other small clans to hunt, he naturally knew how difficult it was to provide fresh food for a group of people, not to mention during a time of war. The First Army's frontline was clearly lacking in manpower and ammunition. How could they use their precious transportation resources on something like this? When Jodl couldn't help but ask the question in his heart, the nurse laughed lightly. These food aren't transported from Grey Castle. They come from various cities in the Kingdom of Dawn. And the ones transporting them aren't the first army or caravans, but the people you rescued. The people we rescued? Yes. The nurse's tone was full of gentleness. Among them are escapees from the kingdom of Everwinter, and refugees from the kingdom of Wolfheart. Some of them went to Neverwinter, while the others hoped to stay and do something to fight against the demons. These food were transported here bit by bit on their carts, or even on their shoulders. Jodl suddenly didn't know what to say. He had also carried out evacuation missions before, and to be honest, those refugees weren't very cooperative at first, and there would occasionally be conflicts between the two sides. He had privately complained about this, and thought they were hopeless idiots. But now it was these idiots who brought them hot food. It's not just the rescued. The nurse's tone was very happy. The group of merchants from the Kingdom of Dawn is also on our side. Not only did they provide many horses, but they also voluntarily lowered the price of food, so everyone can enjoy fresh hot food here. She raised her head and looked at Jodl with a smile. Doesn't this mean that the fact that we are fighting for the entire human race is gradually being accepted by everyone? When I think of this, I feel full of energy. Chapter 1338. To fight for all of humanity. Even though the chief had indeed said that this war would decide the fate of humanity, Jodl had joined the First Army mostly for his clan, and had never considered getting anything in return from others. Regardless of whether they appreciated it or not, this was a mission he had to complete. Even though Jodl still thought so, when he recalled the nurse's smile and ate the fresh and warm food, he felt an inexplicable warmth in his heart. Perhaps what he was doing was much more important than he had imagined. After finishing a sumptuous meal, Jodl returned to his team. The 9th Sand Nation Regiment he belonged to had a few new faces. This was not strange. Soldiers were continuously being sent to the front lines from the rear. Among them were veterans who had departed later, as well as new recruits. Because the front lines always suffered certain losses after every war, it was necessary to adjust and replenish the number of soldiers. Jodl was delighted to find 2 of his comrades who had been defending the clock tower at the time. I thought you were all sacrificed there, only me and Ka. Fairy managed to escape. After a warm hug, Jodl patted the other's shoulder hard. We were lucky. When the clock tower collapsed, the 2 of us were on the lookout at the bottom, and luckily avoided all the falling rocks. The surviving comrade replied. You, on the other hand, are the surprising one. You're still safe and sound in the corridor. If we had known, we wouldn't have left first. No, retreating as soon as possible was the right choice. Jodl shook his head. In that situation, even if they had survived, they would have most likely bumped into the enemies heading towards the clock tower. If Kabbalah hadn't saved his life, he wouldn't have been able to escape the demon's encirclement. It's a pity the others weren't so lucky. In the end, only half of the 10-man team survived, even though the Sand Nation, who had long since gotten used to death, had experienced too many separations. He couldn't help but feel a little sad. After all, after more than half a year of training and getting used to each other, they had formed a new bond between them. This bond was as close as the bond between family members. But as happy as he was, Jodl still had some doubts in his heart. The importance of Gust Castle was self-evident. Even he could understand this. It was the fall of Metalstone Ridge that caused the flank of the defensive line to be completely lost. Similarly, giving up on the Gust Castle would transfer all the pressure to Fine Sand City and Sedimentation Bay, causing them to face the same predicament. He had thought that the First Army would defend the city until the demons completely engulfed it. Being able to survive was something to be thankful for, but he wasn't as relaxed as he thought he would be. If the entire First Army was routed, not only would the clansmen's deaths be meaningless, but the clan's hard-won hope would also vanish. It was only because he scrupulously abided by his duty of obeying orders and his trust in the chief that he did not voice these questions in front of his 2 companions. May the 3 gods accept their souls. May the great chieftain protect their afterlife. After praying silently according to the customs of the Sand Nation, the other party changed the topic. Don't think about this, let's talk about something lighter. You may not know this, but Sir Iron Axe will come to inspect the camp tonight, and there will be a play here. Perform a play? Apart from boosting morale, the commander-in-chief had personally come here to give new orders. This was not surprising. However, something like a play seemed to be incompatible with war. The Sand Nation did not have such refined tastes, so he did not understand why the two were so excited. Obviously, his teammates saw through his thoughts. Yes, it's the famous Starflower Troupe. So, haven't you heard of them? Sir Drow Silvermoon of the Osha clan is one of the troop members. After circling around for a while, the Seagull landed steadily on the airport at the western pass of the Cage Mountain. Nana walked down the gangway and immediately followed the medical staff to the medical camp. Report the conditions of the injured. She put on a white doctor's robe and did not stop walking. Arrange the beds according to the emergency manual. Those with critical organ injuries are given priority. Yes, the assistant nurse quickly replied. Currently, there are a total of 326 injured people in the camp, 55 of whom are in critical condition. Their beds are arranged in tent number 1. In order to prolong their lives, most of them have taken an overdose of delaying agent. The delaying agent is not a problem. Just pay attention to the anti-shock treatment after it expires. If the pain is too intense, use Dreamland water to stop the aftereffects. You should have prepared the Dreamland water for them to be injected later, right? Yes, that's right, the assistant replied. Although it was not the first time she assisted Miss Angel, it was still difficult for her to adapt to this petite girl, who looked no different from the girl next door, calmly giving instructions like an experienced senior scholar. By the way, Nana stopped in front of tent number 1. The treatment equipment I asked for, have you prepared it for each patient? Yes, but... The nurse hesitated and unconsciously used honorifics. Do you really plan to treat so many patients at once? Based on past experience, more than 50 seriously injured people would need at least a few days of water treatment before they could truly be saved. Of course. Nana smiled at her. Don't worry. As long as I'm here, they will all survive. Looking at her confident smile, the nurse felt the worry in her heart suddenly dissipate. She took a deep breath and followed Miss Pine into the tent. After Nana put on the special rubber worm gloves, she stood in front of the first patient. The evolution on her day of adulthood gave her ability a new characteristic. Her original summoning ability could be attached to objects, and she could continuously heal the surrounding injuries. Compared to the previous direct treatment with magic power, the effect of the new ability was obviously not as good. At least, it could not heal the wounds at a speed visible to the naked eye. But at the same time, it consumed much less magic power, and did not require the user to continuously use the ability. This was the biggest advantage of the enchantment ability. As long as the enchanted object was still there, the patient's wounds would slowly heal. This gave Nana the possibility to treat multiple patients at the same time. More importantly, it fundamentally eliminated the need for long periods of treatment and repeated damage to the patient's wounds when there was insufficient magic power in the past. After the High Awakening, she had done an experiment at the camp behind the sedimentation bay. A piece of gauze attached with her magic power could last for a few days to a week. This was enough to help the seriously injured out of danger. The only problem was that after the magic power was exhausted, the object would not disappear on its own. Instead, it would remain in the patient's body. At the same time, in order to maximize the effect of magic power, the enchanted object had to be as close to the most seriously injured part as possible. Therefore, Nana referred to the medical teaching materials in the dream world, and chose the suture and gauze as the first choice. She picked up a scalpel and skillfully cut open the patient's blood-stained abdomen. She found the broken intestines pierced by the bone spear and quickly stitched them together. The thin suture made of sheep intestines could be naturally absorbed by the human body. Even after the wound was healed, there was no need to take it out. It could basically be regarded as a perfect medical material. Of course, for hard injuries such as fractures, the suture was not as effective. But this kind of injury would not be life-threatening for the time being. She could leave it to the doctors and nurses to deal with. Ever since the development of the medical system in Neverwinter, it had evolved from the initial emergency treatment to a group of independent medical staff who could perform simple treatments. Drain the blood and stitch up the wound. Next. Yes. Set a drainage strip on the wound and monitor the change of his injury. Leave it to me. Cut off this leg first. We'll think of a way later. Understood. Under Nana Pine's instructions, the medical staff threw themselves into the intense but orderly treatment. The medical camp instantly became a new battlefield that was bustling with activity. Genius 1 second. Remember my address. Apex mobile version. Chapter 1339. When Kabbalah woke up, her arm was wrapped in thick bandages. She could still feel the pain, but it was insignificant compared to when she was sprayed by the red mist. She couldn't help but be slightly surprised. The wound on her arm wasn't fatal, so theoretically, it wouldn't be treated immediately. It wouldn't be strange if it was left until the end or simply waited for it to heal itself. After all, the characteristics and importance of the little angel's ability were repeatedly told to all new recruits. She didn't think that the Sand Nation would be given special treatment. If it was the bad side, it might be possible. But if it wasn't caused by her ability, how could the wound heal so quickly? Could it be? She suddenly felt a sense of unease. Perhaps she had to leave this place quickly and return to the military camp. Farah, right? A nurse noticed her actions and walked over to look at the name tag hanging on the bedside table. How do you feel now? It's nothing serious. I can return to the unit at any time. She got off the bed and pretended to be unwilling. A few of my comrades died at the hands of the demons. I want them to pay the price immediately. My condolences. The nurse nodded. But before that, you have to go to the camp's main tent. Miss Nana Pine wants to see you. Kabbalah was slightly shocked. She wants to see me? But my injuries are almost. I don't know the reason either, but she specifically told me to. The nurse smiled. The other soldiers can't even see you even if they want to. Come with me. Kabbalah looked at the nurse's defenseless back and followed after a moment of hesitation. After passing through layers of checkpoints, she saw the legendary angel in a tent. Based on her appearance alone, she did fit the image of the First Army. She was petite and cute, with rosy skin and a pair of eyes that didn't seem to have completely shed their childishness. She was basically a young lady from a noble family. Describing her as unweathered by wind and rain was the most appropriate. Kabbalah couldn't help but feel lucky. Maybe things weren't as bad as she thought. Why are you looking for me? Unfortunately, the other party's first sentence shattered all her fantasies. I'm very curious. You're clearly a witch, so why did you hide your identity and join the First Army like a normal person? I don't quite understand. Kabbalah braced herself and replied. So Jodl still reported this to the higher-ups. Your injuries. Nana pointed to her arm. Although there are many lacerations, most of them are caused by a sharp weapon. The devil's claws can't do this. I think it should be a dagger or a bayonet. In addition, when I was cleaning the wound, I found traces of the red mist's corrosion. The red mist can penetrate into the muscles beneath the skin, and even reach the bones. Only witches can suffer from this kind of damage. Even if you purposely damaged the wound, this cannot be faked. Kabra shut her mouth. The other party hadn't heard the news from Jodl, and he had explained it very clearly. It could be said that he didn't even leave her any room to argue. Previously, he had thought that the other party was naive, and that he could perhaps use words or feign ignorance to coax him out of this predicament. But now, it seemed that it was nothing more than a laughable plan. After a while, she whispered, "Have you ever seen a witch corroded by the red mist?" Nana curled her lips. "I can do it myself." Kabbalah was stunned. It's said that the red mist can cause extremely serious harm to witches, but no one knows the specific treatment method, so I could only test it myself, the little girl said calmly. If a sister is really injured by the red mist and I can't do anything, wouldn't I regret it for the rest of my life? She paused. Fortunately, as long as they don't breathe in large amounts of the red mist or get hit in a vital area like the head, they can be saved in a short period of time. So remember, the next time you encounter this kind of situation, the safest thing to do is to immediately cut off your arm. Kabbalah was dumbfounded. Even now, She couldn't forget how intense the pain of being corroded by the red mist was. Usually, after experiencing it once, they definitely wouldn't want to try it a second time. But from the other party's tone, it seemed like she had repeated it several times. Yet when she said this, Nana's expression didn't change much, completely unable to be linked to her slightly immature appearance. A greenhouse flower from an aristocratic family? Don't joke around. She let out a long sigh. Now that she thought about it, although she used to be a divine lady, it seemed that she had never gained the upper hand in negotiations, whether it was the Queen of Clearwater or a little girl from the Northern Kingdom. My name is Kabbalah, and I come from the Sandstone clan. Fairy is just a pseudonym. Kabbalah gave up all struggle and revealed her past one by one. At this point, the First Army couldn't let her stay any longer, and because she had once served the great chief's archenemy, Princess Garcia of Grey Castle, it wasn't surprising that she was escorted back to Neverwinter for trial. Although Roland Wimbledon insisted on treating witches well, it didn't mean that he would treat the enemy's subordinates well. I'm very curious, during the battle in the Kingdom of Wolfheart, how did you deceive the church's pure witches? Nana asked. In addition to being able to order others, the art of instruction can also be used to order oneself. If it's only one person, it can even do some things that exceed one's own limits, and death is also one of them. Kabbalah slowly said. After receiving the order, the breathing and heartbeat will temporarily stop. At that time, the pure witches and the Judgment Army were still chasing after the Wolf King, so they didn't waste too much time on me. I see, the scar on your face was left at that time, right? Miss Pine pondered for a while. I don't quite understand. You said that you joined the First Army for the remaining clansmen, so why did you hide your identity and not even tell the clan that you were alive? What can I say? I led everyone to fight for an eternal oasis, but in the end, I was the only one who survived. Kabbalah revealed an indescribable bitterness. They entrusted their trust and hope to me, but I turned them into irrational monsters. Thousands of young and strong clansmen died in a foreign country, and the Sandstone clan was almost annexed. How could I still have the face to return to the clan? The First Army's recruitment of manpower from the Sand Nation made me realize that the only compensation I could make was to join the army, and then use the merit I received to exchange for a green land for my clansmen to live in. The Sand Nation's inspection wasn't as strict as yours, so I fabricated an identity and gained Brian's trust during the siege of the Wildwave and Cutbone clans. She lowered her head and said, As for how you want to deal with me, it's fine, but please don't vent your anger on the Sandstone clan. The remaining clansmen are all children and women, and they have never served Garcia Wimbledon. I understand. Nana nodded. You can go back. Kabbalah couldn't react for a moment. I actually asked you to come here to ask if you want to remove the scar on your face. The little girl spread out her hands. But now it seems that your answer is no. If that's the case, then I have nothing else to say. She opened her mouth but didn't know what to say. Yes, she had never had the upper hand in negotiations. In the past, when she negotiated with the Queen of Clearwater, she was often speechless, just like now. But the feeling between the two was so different. By the way, the Starflower Troop has a performance tonight. It's in the Western Pass camp. Nana smiled. If you return now, you might be able to see the end. Kabbalah bit her lip, bowed to her in the Sand Nation's etiquette, and then turned to leave the tent. Chapter 1340. Is this okay? Nana turned around. Vendi walked out from behind the curtain, and smiled as she rubbed her head. You've already made your decision. Isn't it too late to ask me now? Because I don't know if it's good or bad, she pouted. I'm not as smart as Sister Anna, who's confident in everything she does. There aren't many people like her to begin with, Vendi said gently. So just choose the answer you feel you won't regret. Looking at the little girl's thoughtful expression, she couldn't help but feel a little emotional. He remembered the first time he met Nana. She was still a naive and innocent girl. When she saw a bird, she would go up and say a few words. When she saw blood, she would faint. Let alone thinking about others, she couldn't even understand her own problems. In just a little over 4 years, She had already learned to look at problems from other people's point of view and had her own subjective judgment. Her growth was astonishing. In reality, it wasn't just her. Lightning, Lorger, Lily, and even Mystery Moon had all clearly changed. Regardless of whether their choices were correct, at least they dared to make a choice. This was probably a characteristic of the younger generation. Vendi smiled bitterly. As for herself, she no longer had that kind of courage. Kabbalah walked all the way to the theater. She didn't need road signs to guide her. The lights and bustling voices under the night sky were the best signs. Her pace became faster and faster, gradually turning from walking to running. She didn't know why, but she felt as if her body had become much lighter. In the past, she had never been so eager to return to the First Army as soon as possible. She mobilized her magic and gave herself a small command. Find Jodl in the crowd. Of course, this was to find the squad as soon as possible. After all, he was the only survivor she could be sure of. Her body quickly passed through the crowd like a civet, her eyes constantly capturing the surrounding scenery and matching it with the memories in her mind. 15 minutes later, Kabbalah saw a familiar figure. Almost at the same time, the other party also noticed her. Jodl. That's great, you're all right. Before she could react, Jodl had already hugged her. Kabbalah instantly froze. If it had been any other time, she would have dodged to the side and even slapped him. But looking at Jodl, who was much more agitated than she was, her raised hand didn't manage to slap him. But it only lasted for a few breaths before Jodl came to his senses. In a panic, he loosened his grip and stammered, Sorry. I forgot that I was just too happy, I didn't mean anything else." Kabbalah noticed that two other familiar faces were also walking in their direction. It seemed that the two of them were not the only survivors in the clock tower. She grabbed Jodl, who was apologizing, and pulled him into her arms. If you were in the Iron Sand City, you would have been dragged out and fed to the sand scorpions for your disrespectful behavior towards the Divine Lady. She whispered into his ear, "But I'm not a goddess now, I'm a soldier from the Sand Nation. Do you understand? If you want to put on an act, then do it properly. Don't let others see any flaws. Otherwise, I won't let you off." "Yes, I understand." Jada didn't dare to move. "Very good, don't forget this. By the way, if I had pulled you up first, then it would have been your honor. Naturally, you wouldn't have had to be fed to the sand scorpions." Kabbalah paused. "Now go celebrate with your other teammates. It's great that you were able to leave the hospital so quickly. Is the injury on your arm serious?" As they spoke, the other two had already gathered around. Everyone hugged each other and shared the joy of survival. On the temporarily built stage, the play was nearing its end. Thunderous applause filled the air. No one noticed this small interlude in the Nine Corps. At this moment, the commander-in-chief of the First Army, Ironax, stepped onto the stage. As he spoke, the crowd quickly quietened down. "I know that in the past 8 days, you've all gone through a hellish ordeal. There has never been a war that was so harsh before. Because it didn't start for territory, power, or wealth. The demons only have one goal, and that is to destroy us all. Other than that, they don't need any compensation. So the enemy doesn't care whether we surrender or not. And they don't care about their own losses. Even if their casualties are far greater than ours, they definitely won't stop attacking. Even so, you all still managed to resist until now and survive this hellish ordeal. This is enough to show that although the demons are powerful when they go all out, there's still a limit. They aren't as invincible as the legends describe. The meaning of these 8 days of ordeal can be said to be no less than the Battle of Tequila. There, we defeated an army of demons. In the kingdom of Wolfheart, we faced 6 or 7 armies of demons. The enemy came out in full force, and from the West Mountain to the East Coast, their figures can be seen everywhere. But until now, we still haven't been destroyed." There was a commotion in the crowd. Ironax paused for a moment, then raised his voice. "That's right, in order to avoid the brunt of their attack, I gave the order to temporarily withdraw from Metalstone Ridge and Gus Castle. Sand City and Sedimentation Bay might do the same, but this isn't a defeat, it's an opportunity to launch a counterattack. I know what you're worried about, but don't forget what I said before. This war has nothing to do with territory or wealth, The only goal is to destroy the enemy. We've only abandoned cold stones and empty houses, but the demons have paid the price of tens of thousands of casualties. You're the key to winning the war. As long as the First Army's strength remains, it's only a matter of time before we take back these cities. Sooner or later, the flames of war will spread to the Cage Mountain area, and this place will also become a battlefield. But before that, enjoy this night. Relax so that we can welcome a stronger challenge. After going through the trial of hell, we'll definitely return the favor in hell. Long live Grey Castle, long live His Majesty, long live mankind. As soon as Ironax finished his sentence, the camp erupted into an uproar. Everyone repeated the same slogan, and the doubts and worries in their hearts also melted. At the same time, an uplifting song sounded. Echo walked to the front of the stage step by step, drawing the curtain to the end of the play. In the passionate song, Kabbalah seemed to see the scene of the army sweeping through the demons' camp like a flood. She knew that this was a kind of ability, but she didn't deliberately resist it. Feeling the united voice of the people, she felt that this wasn't bad. Kabbalah glanced at Jodl, who was cheering loudly, and couldn't help but have a thought. When the war ended and the Sandstone clan had a stable place to live, she would probably be forgiven by her clansmen, right? At that time, she could find Miss Nanapine to remove her scar. Chapter 1341. The next day, after Ironax returned to the Cage Mountain Command post on the Seagull, he immediately went to the General Staff office. How was the trip? Edith was sitting at the mahogany table, leisurely sipping black tea. Everyone had been so busy these days that it was common for them to work until the wee hours of the morning, but she still maintained a delicate image, as if she was born with more energy and time than others. Even Ironax admired this kind of ability. Morale is available, he replied briefly. Then we can proceed to the next step of the plan. The Pearl of the Northern Region smiled. By the way, last night, the garrison of Sand City also withdrew from the defensive area. Then the sedimentation bay is the only place left. Ironax looked at the big map on the wall. I suggest that they withdraw as soon as possible and send a troop to reinforce them. There's no need to wait until the defensive line is breached. Ironax nodded. He agreed with this judgment. Currently, there were probably more than 50,000 demons gathering from the west to the east. This number could easily surround the entire sedimentation bay. Once the army converged, the First Army would not be able to find a suitable time to retreat. Since their strategic goal was not to occupy a city or a territory, it was natural for them to abandon the sedimentation bay in order to protect their troops. Ever since the enemy launched the massive attack, the evacuation had not stopped. The residents and merchants who had been maintaining the operation of the city were sent out first, followed by the aristocratic families and nobles who had submitted to Roland. At this moment, the city was just a huge empty shell. As long as the order was given, the garrison could move immediately. I don't quite understand. Agatha, who was flipping through the latest battle report, suddenly murmured. What's the problem? Ironax walked up to her. The difference between the number of casualties and the number of enemies killed is more than 30 times. How did they do it? Since the 4 cities had faced off against the enemy in the past week, and the reports were sent in batches, they had to be manually compiled. To prevent miscalculation, she repeatedly checked the formula in her hand, but the answer was still the same. According to the statistics, the 4 cities had suffered a total of more than 1,500 casualties, but the number of enemies killed was as high as 50,000. This could already be described as inconceivable. If this was the era of the Union, Agatha would not have hesitated to think that this was a deliberate falsification of military exploits. However, she had fought with the First Army many times, and under the system of multiple checks, it was unlikely that such a problem would occur. Even if the error of 10 to 20% was thrown out, it would not change the essence. When the First Army was on the northern expedition to the Fertile Plains, they had only faced 20,000 demons. At that time, they relied on the railway that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, and built one fortress after another. It took them nearly a year to win the Battle of Tequila. And this time, The strategy of the general staff was to continuously retreat, yet they managed to achieve twice the results of the fertile plains in 8 days? Although she was full of confidence in the humans of today, this result still shocked her. Agatha had thought that this battle would be intense and inextricable. I see. Edith chuckled after reading the Ice Witch's statistics. To be honest, the effect of this plan slightly exceeded my expectations. But it's not all the work of the First Army. The cooperation of the demons was also very important. Hacksword was probably badly injured during the ambush, so he didn't have the energy to control the details of the front line. That's the only reason? Agatha asked incredulously. I know what you're confused about. Edith waved her hand. It seems that we only retreated a few times in exchange for such a result. The battle plan is so simple that it can be summarized in one sentence, but in fact it's not like that. You often stayed in the rear during the era of the Union, so it's normal that you don't understand. To put it simply, only the current First Army can carry out this strategy. Even the First Army during the expedition to the Tequila Ruins couldn't do it. At least not better than they are now. The Pearl of the Northern Region explained. There's often only a thin line between retreat and defeat. It's extremely difficult to maintain order under great pressure, let alone evacuate in an orderly manner. If it were any other noble army, I'm afraid that dispersing in disorder would be the best performance. If it weren't for the First Army's experience in the Tequila night attack and the previous evacuation team's performance in carrying out orders, I wouldn't have dared to carry out this plan at all. In addition, the new weapons are also very useful. At least in the city streets, without the support of the Longsong cannons, they can still rely on the firepower of general-purpose machine guns and field cannons to compete with the enemy. The biggest advantage of firearms is distance. Once the entire army is mobilized, they will always have the upper hand, and it's only natural that we achieve this result. Edith paused here. But it's also true that we've lost the outer line of defense, so the next step is the key to the whole plan. Once the demons take over the 4 cities, they will definitely start planning the next round of attacks. Cage Mountain is both a barrier and a raw material source for the glory of the sun, so we can't use the method of exchanging land for people. We must further reduce the enemy's strength before they recover. Red Mist, Agatha said in a low voice. That's right. These 4 cities are already outside the Red Mist area, so the demons' reliance on their supply lines will definitely increase. It's also very likely that the bloodlines will reappear. Currently, the battle lines span almost the entire kingdom of Wolfheart, so I don't think they can take care of everything. Before the mist storage towers are built, the demons can only rely on the fortress-like monstrous beasts and human transportation, Iron Axe added. Previously, their attacks from the flanks all started with the monstrous beasts, but according to Lightning and Maggie's observations, after losing a large number of mad demons, their protection of the monstrous beasts is no longer as good as before. Also, when attacking the 4 cities, the main demon supply lines were all hidden in the Red Mist area, but now they will be exposed to the First Army. The problem is that this means we need to take the initiative. Agatha hesitated. The fortress-like monstrous beasts can move on their own, and they aren't afraid of the aerial night strafing. We can only send ground troops to destroy them. But we can see the enemy, and the enemy can also see us. Even if the protection of the monstrous beasts is reduced, they can still send reinforcements at the last moment. Taking into account the journey back and forth, we may very well lose the advantage of distance. If the demons catch up to us, in a battle without concealment, even if the First Army could repel the demons, they would definitely suffer heavy losses. So speed is everything. The corners of her lips curled up. As long as we can counterattack before the enemy can react, it'll be fine. But how could they achieve this? Agatha turned her gaze to the map, trying to find a shortcut from Cage Mountain to the 4 cities. There were quite a few roads between the 2 places. Among them were former trade routes, as well as hard roads built later on to speed up the evacuation. They spread between the 4 cities and Cage Mountain like a spider web. But these roads didn't have the ability to shorten the distance. Not to mention the fact that the First Army didn't have any cavalry. Even if they had a large number of horses, It was hard to say if they could catch up to the fortress-like monstrous beasts. Furthermore, the firepower that light cavalry could carry was limited, and wasn't suitable to deal with those huge monsters. Of course not now. The Pearl of the Northern region seemed to have seen through her confusion. This plan still lacks a crucial factor. Only when it is in place will all the conditions be met. But according to the plan, you'll see it very soon. Chapter 1342. 3 days later, the defenders of the sedimentation bay successfully withdrew from the encirclement before the demons closed in. 80% of the territory of the Kingdom of Wolfheart had fallen into the hands of the demons. The first army was concentrated at the West Pass and the Central Pass of the Cage Mountain, which were the only two natural passageways between the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Dawn. On the same day, the first main road connecting the north and south was finally completed. The cement roads extending from both sides merged into one at the Central Pass of the Cage Mountain, which meant that Neverwinter had a direct road to the Kingdom of Wolfheart. When the first hump convoy slowly appeared at the end of the horizon, the onlookers gasped. "What's that? It's like a hill. It has wheels. I think it's a car. Even the outer shell is made of iron. How much money did it cost? If it were pulled by horses, I'm afraid even 10 horses wouldn't be able to pull it. Ignorant people." White glanced around at his colleagues and showed a disdainful expression. They were making a fuss about nothing. If they saw those iron birds that could fly in the air, their eyeballs would probably fall out of their sockets. White was not here to celebrate the opening of the road for the Grey Castle people. Like most of the coachmen, he was here to receive a good commission. Ever since he encountered the demons in the hinterland of the Kingdom of Wolfheart, he dared not step into any territory other than the Grey Castle people's territory. After all, it was already a blessing from God to encounter an Iron Bird rescue mission. He did not think that he would be so lucky as to run into the Grey Castle people every time. White was inspired by the logistics team that the refugees had organized. Although the income was not as good as the transportation team, it was safer. Moreover, no matter how thin and weak his horse and carriage were, they were still better than the refugees' carts. However, he was not the only one who noticed this. As the demons approached and the townspeople evacuated, many of the coachmen also moved to the rear like him. The originally spontaneous team had suddenly grown a lot stronger, and it was almost like an industry. Thinking of this, White was somewhat upset. He had come here first, but he still had to compete with these young lads. If Smarty was here, he would probably have formed his own transport team by now, right? In just a short while, those huge objects had arrived in front of them. Heavy and clumsy as they looked, they were not much slower than carriages. Especially when its body was fully revealed. Even White, who prided himself on being knowledgeable, felt a strong sense of oppression coming from it. There was no other reason other than the fact that these vehicles were too big. Just the wheels alone were half the height of a person, and the width was thicker than a person's body. The steel rims were wrapped in a layer of pitch-black gelatinous material, and it was indescribably stable on the road. Looking back at the carriage that he had originally treated as a treasure, White even felt a sense of inferiority. Through the glass window of the carriage, he looked at the coachman who was looking down at him from above, and the feeling was even more obvious. White couldn't help but think that if he used it to pull the goods, how many times would it be able to pull the goods with his carriage? It had to be at least 10 times. According to Grey Castle's pricing method, that would be 10 times the income. They issued a commission. Someone shouted, and the people immediately stopped talking and rushed into the camp. Although the carrying capacity of these never-before-seen carriages was much higher than that of carriages and handcarts, they still had to rely on them to deliver the goods to the various camps and mountains. White was no exception. However, there was a lingering thought in his mind. It would be great if he could have a carriage like this. Farina pulled the handbrake and jumped out of the driver's compartment. She did not expect that she would eventually return to the Kingdom of Wolfheart in such a way. Although she had made up her mind, she was, after all, a member of the church. Even if she passed the screening, the administrative office might not necessarily allow her to go to the front. However, no one came to remind Farina that she was once a sinner. and the driver's route arrangement was completely based on her results. It only took her a week to master all the driving skills of the steam-powered truck, and she also passed the final test with full marks. When she proposed to be responsible for the transportation of the route from the Windward Territory to the Sparkling River, the officer in charge immediately agreed. This was not the first time she had passed this checkpoint. Although the surrounding scenery was similar to what she remembered, the overall appearance was very different. There were many temporary houses and tents near the checkpoint. Dark hard roads could be seen everywhere, and barricades, sentry towers and barbed wire fences divided the camp into several distinct areas. No matter which area it was, she could see many figures bustling about. Even without asking, she could feel that the air here was filled with the smell of war. This smell was so familiar to Farina that she was slightly absent-minded. "What's wrong?" Joe's voice interrupted her turbulent thoughts. "No, nothing." Farina shook her head. "I think I've already got the answer." As a member of the Judgment Army, she had a deeper understanding of the power of Grey Castle than most people. If the opponent was just a noble, the First Army would not have needed to put up such a formation. If everything in front of her was an illusion created to deceive her, then she thought too highly of herself. Only the legendary demons could make Roland fight with all his strength. Then next we help the King of Grey Castle win first. Farina lowered her eyelids. "This is the beginning of my atonement. I'll be with you until the end." Joe gently held her hands. "Is that Farina and Joe from the second convoy?" A voice suddenly sounded behind them, interrupting them from looking at each other. "Yes, what can I do for you?" Farina coughed twice and turned around guiltily. The man who looked like an officer first saluted and then said, "The Commander-in-Chief of the First Army, Sir Iron Axe, wants to meet all the drivers of the hump. He's now in the Cage Mountain Command Center. Please follow me." During the training, the convoy members had been told that logistics and transportation were also a part of military operations. Compared to the scheduled transportation plan, they should follow the Army's deployment first. Farina and Joe looked at each other and then nodded. As soon as she entered the Cage Mountain Command Center and saw everyone present, Farina realized that this meeting might not be as simple as it seemed. At least, it would not be a simple greeting and greeting party, because the woman standing in the middle of the crowd had beautiful gray hair, which was the symbol of the royal bloodline of Grey Castle. When someone stood up and introduced her, she was even more certain of her judgment. Princess Tilly of Grey Castle, the Commander-in-Chief of the First Army, Iron Axe, the Commander of the First Army, Vanner, the Commander of the Artillery Battalion, Brian, the Commander of the Gun Battalion, and Agatha, the Commander of the Witch Union. It could be said that all the high-level officials of the front line had gathered in this hall. "Welcome to the Cage Mountain." Iron Axe went straight to the point. "I have a mission for you." Chapter 1343. I know you're not soldiers, and I also know that a group of people from the First Army's Reserve Force and the Second Army are training to drive steam trucks, but time waits for no one. Iron Axe's calm eyes swept over the crowd. "Since you're the first batch of drivers to pass the test and achieve excellent results, it means that you're good enough to take on this task." The task is very simple. Roland walked up to the map on the table and moved a chess piece from the Kingdom of Dawn to a black line in the eastern part of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. This place is about 150 kilometers away from the central checkpoint. All you need to do is to transport the people and supplies in the vehicles here and bring them back after the attack. You'll stay here for about half an hour. If you're lucky, you won't even encounter the enemy. At this point, Iron Axe paused. There was a commotion in the crowd. After all, the other meaning of this sentence was that if they were unlucky, they would encounter the devil. After waiting for a while, the Commander-in-Chief continued. "Of course, the First Army will still be responsible for the battle. You just need to focus on driving. There are a total of 10 trucks arriving at Cage Mountain, and according to the plan, 4 to 5 trucks will be enough to achieve the mission. Therefore, according to the usual practice of the administrative office, we'll recruit people to set off. Every time you complete a transportation task to and fro the front, you'll get an extra bonus of 3 times the salary. This bonus will be paid by the First Army and has nothing to do with the salary given by the administrative office. So, those who are willing to accept the task, please step forward. Farina stepped forward without hesitation. To her slight surprise, all the trucks chose to accept the task. The only difference was the speed at which they made the decision. She had come to the front line to see the demons, and she had once served in the Judgment Army, so she had long been accustomed to stepping onto the battlefield. But the others were different. Apart from their identities as drivers, most of them were just free citizens of Neverwinter. There was no doubt that they had full trust in the First Army to make this decision. Iron Axe quickly picked out 5 trucks in order, including the second truck that Farina was in. I'll leave them to you. The commander-in-chief looked at Van. The battle will officially begin at dawn tomorrow. I can't help but feel a little worried. After all the drivers left the command center, Agatha said in a low voice, the number of people dispatched is small, but it requires the close cooperation of the entire army. Moreover, there are ordinary citizens among them, and the training time is less than a day. This kind of arrangement is too urgent. She finally understood what the Pearl of the Northern region meant by lightning speed. Judging from the plan alone, the plan was indeed highly feasible. The simple hardened road that was previously repaired for the migration had now become the foundation of their counterattack. Even if its width, thickness, and construction quality were not comparable to the main artery project, it was still much better than gravel or dirt roads. Under the condition of further limiting the load, it was not impossible for the vehicle to run. Over a distance of 200 kilometers, the average speed of the Rubik's Cube steam truck was much higher than that of any cavalry. Even if the latter did not care about the horsepower and switched between 2 riders, it would still take them 2 days. If it were a truck, they would basically be able to complete the journey in 6 to 8 hours, not to mention the heavy equipment that this counterattack squad could carry. The only problem was that not only did it include all the soldiers of the First Army, it also included non-combat personnel. It was hard to predict what kind of unexpected situation they would encounter. There are certain unexpected factors in this battle, but compared to the benefits, it is almost negligible, Edith said frankly. The demons may deploy the fortress-like monstrous beasts at any time. Instead of waiting for an opportunity, we might as well seize the opportunity now. I don't think the enemy would expect us to launch a counterattack on them less than a day after the humans lost the sedimentation bay. The most likely outcome of failure is returning with nothing, while success will cause the demons' subsequent actions to be thwarted. It goes without saying which choice to make. Furthermore, war is full of surprises. Sometimes, a seemingly thorough plan can be ruined by a small coincidence. At this point, she broke into a smile. So let's pray that the god of luck is on our side. The next day, 7 o'clock in the morning. There was a light breeze and light snow. Under the dusky sky, 5 steam-powered trucks formed a long line as they slowly drove out of the tranquil camp and headed east. Unlike when they were transporting goods, gray and white tarpaulins were set up at the back of the carriages, looking like small moving piles of snow from afar. 3 of the trucks were dragging 152mm long song cannons, the long black barrels blending into the ruts of the carriages. Only when one got closer would one notice the faint cold light refracted from the hydraulic brake. 2 hours later, 25 fully fueled biplanes took off from Thorntown's landing strip and rushed to the predetermined battlefield under the lead of Seagull. Unlike their usual battles, the Air Knight Squadron did not choose to fly at a lower altitude where it was easier to identify their direction. Instead, they flew straight into the clouds, flying through the gaps between the clouds. This meant that they would lose a large portion of their field of vision. Other than the compass, the only thing that could guide them was the faintly discernible body of Seagull. Once they fell behind, it would be almost impossible to find the fleet again. In order to avoid getting lost, everyone was on full alert. Other than the roar of the engines, there was not a single sound of conversation in the cabin. At the same time, Lightning and Maggie appeared in the airspace of the battlefield and separately searched for any possible demons. 2 hours and 15 minutes after the start of the operation, the first accident appeared in the convoy. Due to the quality of the road, the 4th convoy broke down while crossing a pit. After a simple transfer, The convoy resumed its journey, leaving only the malfunctioning crew to repair it. Half an hour later, the Air Night Squadron also had an accident. 2 planes lost track of the plane in front when they flew over an overlapping cloud layer. They could only turn around and return alone according to the rules before they set off. On the way back, they were not allowed to leave the cloud layer. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. 3 hours and 6 minutes later, the steam truck team was the first to arrive at their destination. "Oh my God, Farina." Joe leaned forward slightly and murmured, "I see it." Farina steadily stopped the car and stared at the side of the driver's seat with a solemn expression. Through the windshield, she saw a bone-like frame standing on the top of a mountain in the distance. At first glance, it looked only 1/3 the size of a fingertip, but considering the distance, she could imagine how astonishing the behemoth was. Around the white bone, there was a bright red fog that almost covered the entire mountain, forming a sharp contrast with the surrounding snowy scenery. It was definitely not a human creation. Just by looking at it, one could feel a cold chill rising from the bottom of one's heart. Farina involuntarily tightened her grip on the steering wheel. There was no doubt that the devil had come to the world. Chapter 1344. Now, guys, get out of the car. Act according to the drill. Hurry up. The shouts from the back of the carriage brought Farina back to reality. "Let's go and help," she said to Joe, then pushed open the door and jumped out of the cockpit. In just a few short breaths, the passengers of the convoy were already busy. They wrote and drew in their notebooks while erecting a few strange instruments on the ground. Judging from their conversation, those instruments seemed to be used to locate the target for the soldiers. At this point, no matter how slow Farina was, she already knew what the First Army was going to do. They were going to bombard the enemy several kilometers away from here. Although she had long known that the people of Grey Castle were best at long-range attacks with firearms, she still felt a trace of shock when she saw this scene with her own eyes. Any thrown weapon would be affected by the wind and its own weight, and the further the distance, the greater the impact. Even the slightest disturbance would cause a great change in the outcome. How on earth did they ensure that the bullets fired from the firearms would still fly according to their expectations at such a long distance? Could it be that those seemingly simple instruments could predict the future? If so, it was not surprising that the church suffered a crushing defeat in the Battle of Coldwind Ridge. However, this kind of technical work was completely useless to Farina. She consciously walked to the rear of the convoy, hoping to contribute to the unloading of the goods. Due to the requirement of confidentiality, the driver did not know in advance who was on the vehicle, nor did he know what was on the vehicle. However, the convoy must have been dragging a lot of things. At this time, at least one more person could at least speed up the preparation process. She might not be good at other things, but she was by no means weak. However, the scene in the rear left her dumbfounded. A group of tall and sturdy men were moving the long wooden boxes with great efficiency, and those heavy trailing firearms didn't seem too cumbersome in their hands. After removing the restrictions of the connectors, a few people surrounded the long steel pipe and dragged it down the hardened road. What surprised Farina even more was that she actually saw several familiar faces in the crowd. Wait! Aren't they the God's Punishment Army? Although they were not wearing armor, judging from their strength, skills, and appearance, it was clear that they were the outstanding warriors of Hermes. "Yo, we meet again." Suddenly, someone patted her shoulder. Hearing this familiar voice, Farina suddenly turned around. "Zoe? I didn't expect you to remember my name." Zoe grinned. "I thought you would call me Army Commander Inova first." She took a deep breath. "Then these people are..." "Yes, they are all tequila witches." Zoe spread out her hands. "See, I didn't lie to you, did I? There are hundreds of people like me in Neverwinter. All of them are using the bodies you contributed. Remember not to make a fuss when you meet familiar people in the future." The other party's words replayed in his ears. For a moment, Farina did not know what to say. Charles bowed deeply to the latter. "Miss Zoe, I've always felt sorry that I didn't have the chance to thank you last time. It's great to see you again. Thank you for saving Miss Farina." "Miss Zoe. Mortal, you know a lot. I'll accept your gratitude." Zoe shrugged. Let's talk about other things later. Now let's focus on dealing with the demons. Well, Farina could not help saying as she watched Charles leave. Zoe stopped. Thank you. And I'm very sorry for the mistakes the church has made. It's not your fault. You're just a person who was deceived. She waved her hand, and without looking back, she walked towards the camp that was being set up. Farina opened her mouth, but in the end, it turned into a sigh. But what she did not see was that Zoe slightly curled up the corner of her mouth. Just as Iron Axe had predicted, she, as the pilot, was unable to help at all. In less than 15 minutes, the First Army was ready to shoot. Report number 1, number 2, and number 3 cannons have been loaded. Open fire. The commander ordered decisively. Following a loud bang, a veil like snow mist rose up from the bottom of the cannon, and the roar reverberated endlessly in the mountains like a thunderclap rolling across the horizon. The boiling hot shell casings sizzled as they were emptied into the snow, and new shells were quickly loaded, waiting for the next shot. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water, and the teamwork between the cannoneers was as if they were one person. From this detail, it could be seen how much they had trained. Farina realized that the difference between the First Army and the other armies was not just in firearms. After a dozen breaths, she finally saw a snow pillar rise from the top of the mountain. The ground troops have started shooting. Sylvie, who was on the Seagull, could see it more clearly. After the 3 shells drew a long parabola, they all landed near the fortress-like monstrous beast, with the closest one less than 300 meters away. The sudden explosion caused the demons stationed in the surroundings to fall into chaos, and a few devil beasts flapped their wings and flew into the sky. After informing the commander of the cannoneers below her of the correction information, she focused all her attention on the enemy's movements. How are the demons reacting? Tilly asked. There are no signs of the main target moving, and only a few devil beasts have flown into the sky. It shouldn't be long before they discover the truck team. You're lucky. Andrea whistled. Indeed, good luck. Sylvie nodded imperceptibly. According to the plan formulated by the General Staff, the counterattack team was prepared to be discovered before they could approach the fortress-like monstrous beast and continue firing at the target despite the obstruction of the patrolling devil beasts. This plan was based on the experience accumulated from fighting the demon's vanguard on the fertile plains. If the opponent was Osrook, 20 to 15 kilometers was already a high-risk zone. Although a large number of troops had been sent to the sedimentation bay after a huge battle, there were still many devil beasts and guards stationed near the fortress, as it was an extremely important moving obelisk. However, their perimeter was not watertight, and for a long time, no devil beasts flew past this area. It was precisely because the enemy had not discovered the counterattack team that Tilly had gotten Sylvie to continue guiding the truck forward, and only when they were 8 kilometers away from the target did they switch to the artillery position. This could only mean that the enemy had relaxed after taking over the 4 cities. A moment later, the second round of artillery shells whistled through the air. The calibrated second round of attacks was clearly much more accurate. 2 of them pierced through the monstrous beast's towering skeleton, and landed at its feet one after the other, killing several mad demons. The third shot directly penetrated the monstrous beast's wide back, causing a cloud of snow and flesh to rise. The monstrous beast let out an ear-piercing shriek, and at the same time, took 2 steps forward. More devil beasts flew out from all directions and formed a formation in the air. However, by the time they confirmed where the attack came from, it was already 5 minutes later. This was definitely not considered slow in previous battles, but against the Longsong cannons 8 kilometers away, 5 minutes was enough for the artillerymen to fire 10 rounds of artillery fire, and this included the time needed to adjust the firing parameters. The operation this time was not like the Battle of Tequila, where the battle ended with a precise leg-breaking strike, but to the enemy, the result was much more tragic. The skeletal body that had been repeatedly bombarded was already riddled with wounds, and there were several bullet holes all over it. Through the layers of broken bones, one could see the trembling organs and blue blood flowing everywhere below. Although it tried its best to escape, compared to the firing speed of the cannons, this attempt did not have much of an effect. When another artillery shell drilled into the monstrous beast's body, it let out a mournful wail, and after a flash of blue light, its huge body actually exploded. Organs and blood splattered down like a waterfall, dyeing the snow on the hillside with a layer of strange color. The empty limbs seemed to have lost their support as they powerlessly snapped, peeled off and collapsed, crashing into the bodies of the devil beasts that could not dodge in time, crushing them into a pile of twisted rags. Be careful, they're coming. At the same time, Sylvie also warned the convoy of the approaching devil beasts. Chapter 1345. The enemy has found us. Hurry up, pack your things and get on the truck. Everyone, retreat according to the original route. Although she did not know why the First Army was so familiar with the demon's movements, Farina flew to the truck as soon as she heard the order. She skillfully closed the exhaust valve and pushed the two handles that controlled the Rubik's Cube switch to the starting position. The cylinder at the front of the truck began to tremble, and the needle of the pressure gauge moved to the right at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon it reached the standard point. This meant that as long as she released the brake, the truck could move at any time. She poked her head out and looked in the direction of the hillside. The mountaintop, which had been shrouded in mist, was now much clearer. The miasma-like red mist was dissipating at a speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, many sesame-sized black spots appeared on the white hillside. They surged down the slope and rushed in the direction of the convoy, like a swarm of ants coming out of their nest. Dozens of flying demons appeared in the sky, and it seemed that they would not let them go. This scene reminded Farina of the city wall on the Hermes Plateau. There, tens of thousands of demonic beasts had attacked the defense line formed by the Judgment Army. Let's go. A god's punishment which patted the door of her truck, which was a signal that all the team members were ready to retreat. Farina took a deep breath and pulled the brake lever. The steam truck began to move slowly. At this time, the other convoys also started their trucks. From turning around to driving out of the shooting area, everyone did a perfect job. Even better than during the assessment. Even so, the distance between them and the enemy was not widened. When the convoy accelerated to the highest speed, the pursuers from the air were even closer to them. No, they're too fast. If this goes on, they'll catch up with us. Joe shouted anxiously. Farina held the steering wheel tightly and did not move. It was common sense that those with wings would always run faster than those on the ground. Since the enemy even had a flying unit, it was only a matter of time before they caught up with them. Considering that the people of Grey Castle had been fighting with the demons for a long time, they should know this. Now the only hope was that they had already prepared for this situation. No matter how the First Army responded, it would be a battle that she could not intervene in. Therefore, her most important task at the moment was to control the truck well, and not drag the others down. Don't worry about the pursuers. Help me keep an eye on the road ahead. If there's a hole, warn me as soon as possible, she said without changing her expression. Joe swallowed hard and nodded. I got it. For more than an hour, the only thing Good could see was the tail of Seagull and the flashing track lights. Being in the clouds for a long time made him lose his sense of direction and altitude. Flying in this state was a huge drain on his physical and mental strength. He had to focus all his attention to maintain the plane's position. Judging from the changes in the compass, the Air Knight Squadron had been hovering in the air for the rest of the time, clearly waiting for the enemy to appear. As for the whereabouts of his other companions and the current situation, Good had no idea at all. In addition to this lingering feeling of loss and depression, the terrible environment in the clouds was also a big problem. The damp water vapor had condensed into a thin layer of frost on the windshield and cabin. Although the cold wind was blocked by the rubber lining of the flight suit, the humidity still brought away some of his body temperature, making his limbs as slow as a block of wood. If not for Finken, who could talk to him in the back seat, he was afraid that he would not have lasted until now. Princess Tilly had revealed that His Majesty was researching a communication device that could allow people in two different places to communicate across space. At this moment, the biggest thought in his mind was to make this device a reality as soon as possible. Look, the light has changed. Finken suddenly shouted. Good looked at Seagull and saw that the yellow light hanging at the tail of the plane had unknowingly turned bright red. He could not help but feel excited. Red was a signal to attack. Once the track lights glowed red, it meant that they should immediately fly down out of the clouds and attack the enemy. As for who the enemy was, it did not matter. It was better than continuing to go around in circles in this labyrinthine cloud layer. Without hesitation, Good pressed down on the control stick. The pure white clouds immediately enveloped him. The moment his vision was restored, Good felt his entire body lighten. The black and white earth and the gray sky seemed to form a beautiful scene. At the same time, there was also a group of devil beasts flying in the sky. The latter completely did not notice the aerial knights that suddenly emerged from the clouds. They were less than 300 meters above the ground, and their target was obviously the steam truck squad that was dragging long wheel ruts in the snow. The nose of their plane happened to be facing the direction of the enemy, which was an excellent angle for engagement. As long as the plane was slightly pitched, the bullets from the machine guns would be able to penetrate the enemy's formation lengthwise. Moreover, the aerial knight had an absolute advantage in altitude. After a round of strafing, no matter how the devil beasts reacted, they would not be able to shake off the biplane's follow-up pursuit. It was as perfect as in the textbooks. The gloominess that had previously hidden in the clouds was swept away. Good controlled the plane to dive down, and at the same time he pressed the trigger. Finkin, who was sitting in the back seat, let out a strange cry. In an instant, more than a dozen silver streamers appeared in the sky. They shot into the herd of devil beasts from different angles, and spread from the head to the tail. Faced with this sudden attack, the demons had no time to react. Several flowers of blood blossomed in the air, and the mad demons and devil beasts that were hit fell to the ground like stones. At this moment, they realized that they were not the only hunters on this battlefield. The herd of devil beasts suddenly dispersed. Some of them continued to pounce on the convoy, while others turned around and seemed to want to fight to the death with the aerial knight. 26 devil beasts. Good quickly counted the number of devil beasts. In a sense, the number of people on both sides was almost equal. Apart from the few patrolling devil beasts that they had encountered before, this could be regarded as the first large-scale aerial battle between them. Signal Heinz and tell him to follow behind us, he shouted at the top of his lungs. In a short span of 20 seconds, the aerial knight squadron had already flown over the devil beasts' heads. The first round had ended with their complete victory. With the speed brought by the dive, the fire of heaven, that Good piloted quickly completed a turn, and cut in a perfect arc from the side to the back of a devil beast that was trying hard to climb up. The distance between the two was less than 200 meters. He could even see the mad demon trying hard to turn around, trying to find the best angle to throw its spear. However, he obviously would not give the other party this opportunity. The barrel of the gun spat out a tongue of flame. The bright tracer bullet pierced through the back of the devil beast like a meteor. The sudden fall of the mount made its attempt futile. Even if it was not hit on the spot by the machine gun, the result from falling from this height was no different. Finkin could not help but whistle. The other teammates also locked onto their targets, and the two sides quickly engaged in a fierce battle. The second round began. Chapter 1346. Right for o'clock, two of them. His teammates' warnings mixed with the sound of machine gun fire, sounding intermittent. Attention, spear throwing. Good suddenly pushed the stick to the left, and the biplane immediately flipped over and fell downwards at a slanted angle. Whoosh! The bone spears whistled past the top of his head, and one of them directly pierced through the upper wing, leaving a fist-sized hole in the skin. Without even looking at the enemy, he continued to accelerate downwards, and the plane soon reached its top speed. This was the combat strategy that Her Highness Tilly had come up with after the aerial knight's battle with the enemy. At low speeds, the devil beasts possess far greater agility than biplanes. They could hover in the air, complete maneuvers such as turning around and flying backwards within a very small radius. This made it very difficult to use tactical maneuvers to escape from the devil beast's tail bites. At the same time, the rear seat shooter was almost unable to predict the target's route within the effective firing range. The combination of these two factors was extremely disadvantageous for a dogfight. But at the same time, the devil beasts also had a very obvious weakness. Their only means of attack came from the spears thrown by the rider behind them, and their flying and climbing speed was inferior to the fire of heaven. A magic stone that could only be thrown twice consecutively would pose a threat in terms of distance and power, and only at close range would it pose a threat. Therefore, when being targeted by the enemy, the safest way to fight was to use the belly of the plane to face the enemy, and at the same time, quickly increase the distance between the two, and then climb back up again, using the machine gun's longer effective firing range to kill the enemy. The biplane was equipped with protective plates in both cockpits, which could effectively protect the pilot from being directly pierced by the spears. The wide wings seemed like an extremely fragile target, but as long as the main frame was not hit, a few holes in it would not cause fatal damage to the plane. Compared to the current training plane, the Fire of Heaven had a major improvement, which was to incorporate the wing surface roll control into the main control stick. The pilot only needed one hand to easily control the pitch and direction of the plane. Once the plane reached full speed, it would only take a few seconds to shake off the enemy. During this time, the Mad Demon could at most throw 2 bone spears, and it was not easy to hit the rapidly departing plane. Multiple battles had proven the effectiveness of this method. So far, the Air Knight had lost several planes, but not a single person had died on the battlefield. Accompanied by the high-pitched roar of the engine, Good flew hundreds of meters in the blink of an eye. Even if the Mad Demon behind him wanted to throw its spear again, it would not have the chance to reach him. But after he pulled up the nose of the plane, he did not immediately turn around to look for the 2 demons that had their eyes on him. Instead, he looked at the other friendly plane that had its tail bitten. As for the enemies behind them, Heinz was waiting for them. Using the advantage of height and field of vision he had accumulated, he would attack the enemies that were chasing after him. At the same time, he would leave his tail for his teammates to protect. This was the second principle of the Aerial Knight. After 2 attacks, Good got his 4th kill. The Aerial Knight gradually gained the upper hand on the battlefield. At this time, Lightning and Maggie also joined the battle. All the demons were horrified to find that a giant demon of their kind had appeared in the sky, appearing and disappearing from time to time. It looked incomparably powerful, but its target was themselves. The devil beast showed obvious fear under the sudden appearance of the giant mouth. Even if the Mad Demon angrily pulled the reins, the devil beast could not move as fast as before. This confusion further increased the disadvantage of the demons. Lightning shuttled through the battlefield like a ghost. Her short-distance flight at the speed of sound made it impossible for the Mad Demons to fight back. Often, when the Mad Demons raised their bone spears, Lightning's revolver was already at the back of their heads. Every few minutes, a devil beast would be shot down. It was as if a devil rain was falling from the sky. Naturally, Farina saw the sound of these behemoths falling to the ground. She saw with her own eyes a winged monster with blood all over its body crash into the snow not far from the road. The strong impact caused it to roll several times before it stopped. Its wings and limbs were flung everywhere like rags. What happened in the sky? There was no doubt that the First Army was prepared for the enemies coming from the sky. However, she could only think of the firearms that were specially used to deal with the demons. Until now, she had not heard the sharp hissing of the machine guns at the back of the carriage. Instead, there was a strange buzzing sound coming from above, as if there was a fierce battle going on. The problem was, in the sky? Farina could not hold back her curiosity. She took the opportunity when the carriages passed a straight road to look at the sky behind them. And this one glance caused all the blood in her body to boil. God! She could not help but murmur. Beneath the low clouds, silver streaks of light flickered incessantly like the first rays of dawn. The source of the light was a flock of uniquely shaped gray birds. Unlike the red mist skeletons that gave her a strange feeling, Farina could clearly feel that the giant birds that were fighting the demons were man-made. The birds were symmetrical, balanced, and square, revealing the beauty of war weapons. But precisely because of this, she was even more shocked. Since when were humans able to fly into the sky like birds and step into the realm that only belonged to the gods? We Could we actually do this? She couldn't help but recall an article she had read in the Greycastle Weekly. On the front page, there was a black and white picture. In the picture, the huge machine seemed to be exactly the same as the iron birds in the sky. Is that so? They are the fire of heaven. At that time, the article used the words "a historic moment for mankind." She did not pay much attention to it. After all, she had seen such boastful words too many times. But now, Farina realized that even if those words were 10 times more exaggerated, they would not be able to describe her feelings at the moment. There was lamentation, regret, ridicule, excitement, but most of all pride, because she was also a member of mankind. And pride. How much had he missed out on when he had been hiding in Charles' house for the past year? Farina's body trembled slightly, and her hands tightened on the steering wheel. Although she had missed a lot, it was good that she had turned around, wasn't it? Sylvie clearly saw that the demons in the sky were on the verge of collapsing. Under the crossfire of the Air Knight, Lightning, and Maggie, the opponents were completely at a disadvantage. Several devil beasts were fleeing backward uncontrollably, and this action was bound to affect their own kind. But at this distance, they might not be able to escape from Lightning's subsequent pursuit. As for the demons that were pouncing on the convoy, they did not gain any advantage. Based on past experience, a dozen mad demons jumped off the back of their mounts when the devil beasts flew past the convoy, hoping to avoid the advantage of the machine guns. However, they were facing a group of God's punishment witches who were comparable to extraordinaries. And these witches were also holding 40mm shotguns. Their fates could be described as horrendous. Seeing the God's punishment witches tearing the enemies into pieces while laughing maniacally, even Sylvie could not help but close her eyes. At this point, the victory was already a foregone conclusion. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1347. What's the situation like now? Tilly asked. The enemies who intercepted the convoy were almost completely wiped out, and the demons who are still in the sky are fleeing. We should have won, Sylvie replied. It's a pity that I didn't have the chance to perform in the end. Andrea shrugged regretfully. Looks like that senior demon lord was badly injured. Seagull did not participate in the battle. Instead, it hovered in the clouds, guarding against the possible appearance of Hacksword or other senior demons. After all, the most effective way to deal with these demons with strange abilities was still Andrea's close-range sniping. Unlike her dispirited companions, Sylvie heaved a sigh of relief. She knew that this counterattack was not the same as the ambush against Sky Lord. The reason why the enemy could not detect the existence of Seagull was because she was not on the plane at that time. Changes in the situation on the battlefield were transmitted through the sigil of listening. Even if she was constantly exposed to the vigilant eye demons, Seagull would still disappear without a trace. But this time, as they had to fight far away from the camp, she had to follow Seagull in order to command the overall situation. It was also for this reason that if Sky Lord appeared with a new vigilant eye demon, Seagull would also be discovered by them. In other words, only when Hacksword or other senior demons appeared alone could her attack achieve an unexpected effect. Otherwise, it would be hard to predict how the battle would develop later on if he missed his target. Hence, it was a good thing that they did not appear. After all, there was nothing more worth celebrating than successfully completing a mission and returning safely at the same time. It's better if you don't take action. If Hacksword really comes, I don't think the convoy will be able to escape unscathed. Tilly shook her head helplessly. I'm guessing that when Edith came up with this plan, she was probably betting that the freely moving vigilant eye demons are not something that can be immediately replenished. That's why Sky Lord did not dare to act rashly. These words were practically what Sylvie was thinking. She could not help but nod. As expected of the Princess Royal. Oh, Tilly drilled out of the clouds. Now that we've already won, let's confirm the result of the battle before leaving. Sylvie was experienced in this kind of thing. Without the obstruction of obstacles, she only needed to use a little magic power to complete a rough survey of the battlefield. However, the moment she came to this conclusion, she could not help but be stunned. 2,000. No, close to 3,000. 3,000? Vendi was surprised. How can there be so many? Those mad demons. Sylvie looked at the hillside and took a deep breath. They weren't coming for the convoy. They were fleeing in all directions. Only then did she notice the densely packed holes on the top of the mountain. Apparently, in order to reduce the consumption of fog, most of the enemies had burrowed into the ground and would only be awakened when there was a need to fight. But when the fortress monstrous beasts collapsed, the red mist that had lost its source of supply quickly dissipated, and these demons faced a disaster. They did not swarm out to eliminate the attackers, but because they sensed the dissipation of the fog. Driven by their instincts, they burrowed out of their hiding places and ran down the mountain, hoping to reach the next red mist supply point before they ran out of breath. But whether it was Fine Sand City or Sedimentation Bay, they were too far away. The world that had dissipated from the red mist became clean and clear again, but to the demons, it was an uninhabitable land of death. They did not run far before falling to the ground one after another, spreading out evenly at the foot of the hillside. Apart from a few mad demons who were equipped with gas tanks, most of them were silent. The general staff's judgment on this point was undoubtedly correct. Just like how Grey Castle could not equip every soldier with a god's stone of retaliation, the enemy could not distribute the gas tanks and breathing devices to every mad demon. After mobilizing the fully equipped army to attack the human cities, only the troops that were originally active in the Red Mist area were left to guard this place. If it had been 2 days later, the situation might have been completely different. Even if they recruited drivers from outside the army, they still managed to launch a counterattack the day after the first army retreated from Sedimentation Bay. It had to be said that this decision was extremely decisive. I think that the title of Pearl of the Northern Region will spread throughout the 4 kingdoms after this battle. Tilly curled her lips. With a team of less than 100 people, they had annihilated nearly 3,000 enemies. They had only lost 1 steam truck and 2 fires of heaven, and there were no casualties among the combatants. This successful counterattack had boosted the morale of the First Army's headquarters, and even their voices when reporting work had become much louder. But Edith did not show any satisfaction because of this. Almost on the same day that the news of victory reached Cage Mountain, she threw out the next step of the battle plan. The plan immediately received the approval of the Commander-in-Chief, Iron Axe. The convoy was even on the way back when they received the order to turn to Cage Mountain's West Pass. The truck carrying pure water for the magic cube met up with them halfway, and after rehydrating the entire team, they joined the convoy and drove west together. The Air Knight returned to Thorntown, and after a short preparation he took off again and arrived at Cage Mountain Airport before nightfall. At noon the next day, the convoy, which had been on the move for an entire day, entered the western border of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. As it was more difficult to avoid the potholes and other obstacles on the road at night, 3 more steam trucks were damaged along the way, and the remaining trucks were thrown into an attack on another fortress-like monstrous beast without stopping. Even though the demons had already realized that the humans had designs on these moving obelisks, they did not expect that in just a day and a half, the counterattack team had already completed the transfer across the Kingdom of Wolfheart. The other fortress-like monstrous beast had just retreated into Gus Castle, and in the absence of external protection, the convoy withstood the attacks of a few patrolling devil beasts and approached within 10 kilometers, where they lowered 4 long-song cannons. The Air Knight once again played the role of a hunter. With the tacit cooperation of Sylvie and Tilly, this group of rookies, who had only been on the battlefield for less than half a year, had almost replicated the process of the previous battle. Taking advantage of the fact that the enemy's aerial forces had made the cannons their primary target, they swooped down from above and instantly broke up the enemy's formation. The monstrous beasts were blasted to smithereens by the cannons, and facing the convoy guarded by the God's Punishment Witches, the small number of mad demons did not have the ability to hold them back even if they got close. On the 3rd day, the enemy finally began to expand the defensive perimeter of the 4 cities, and sent people to destroy the simple hardened roads between the cities. However, the entire battle line was hundreds of kilometers long, and it was almost impossible to ensure that not even a drop of water could leak through. That day, The steam trucks drove through an area dozens of kilometers away from Fine Sand City, attracting the attention of the demons. 25 fires of heaven went around the towering impassable mountain range according to plan, and directly charged into the rear of the Metalstone Ridge to strafe the supply line that transported the red mist. It was also at this time that the effects of the 2 consecutive aerial battles and the overly long battle line on the demons gradually became apparent. By the time they had gathered enough devil beasts to rush to the scene, the air night had already disappeared into the cold, howling sky. Chapter 1348. In the following 2 weeks, the battlefield in the kingdom of Wolfheart was in a strange stalemate. The demons who had conquered the 4 cities should have built a new batch of mist storage towers in preparation for conquering the kingdom of Wolfheart, and then the kingdom of Dawn. But the reality was that the First Army's mobile attack had been thwarted. Except for the sedimentation bay by the sea, the other 3 cities had not been able to build any mist storage towers. After being attacked by the Sky Knight, the nobles who were responsible for transporting the red mist wavered. This forced the demons to transfer some troops to supervise and control the normal operation of the bloodline. Coupled with the expansion of the defensive line, the shortage of manpower became more and more obvious. The First Army thought that firing cannons was a good deal, so they did not insist on attacking the 4 cities. The demons patrolling the outermost part of the defensive line were also their hunting targets. Several steam-powered trucks quickly arrived at the preset position, put down the long-song cannons, and fired 2 rounds at the place where the demons were gathered. Then they loaded the trucks and retreated. This kind of small-scale battle happened several times a day. Under the pincer attack of the biplanes and artillery, the demons did not just passively defend. They had organized many attacks. Even when the vanguard attacked the Cage Mountain, they organized a mixed team of humans and demons to take the opportunity to destroy the roads near the Cage Mountain, using black gunpowder in the process. But at this time, the main artery between the north and the south had been connected, and cement produced by the Kingdom of Dawn could be transferred to the front at any time. The simple roads destroyed by the explosions were often repaired by Lotus and the engineering team overnight. Although the low temperature and snowstorm greatly lengthened the solidification time of the cement, it was ultimately just a matter of cost-effectiveness. If the stabilized gravel surface was crushed, they could just repair it. After the main artery project was completed, a large number of idle construction teams gathered in the Cage Mountain area. The First Army did not lack manpower in this area. As the seesaw battle continued, the demons' attacks became slower and slower. They completely lost the momentum they had at the beginning, and the front lines of both sides temporarily froze. "My lord," Hacksword raised his head and looked at Siaces, who seemed to want to say something but then slowly closed his eyes. "Speak." From Siaces' expression, it was definitely not good news. However, there had been too much bad news recently, and it was no longer in the mood to express its anger and disappointment. Totolok personally led a team to attack the humans' command post at Cage Mountain. In the end, he died heroically on the front lines. Siaces lowered his head. He fulfilled his promise. It fulfilled its promise, but it did not complete its mission. Hacksword didn't have much of a reaction to this long-expected result. It did not even want to ask about the specific circumstances of the death of its subordinates. When fighting against the Union, the death of every higher ascendant meant that the challenger had a powerful background, so it was necessary to collect information. However, if they were to fight against the humans of today, they would be killed by those strange firearms if they were not careful. It could totally imagine what would happen to its subordinates in the end. The fact that Totolok was personally leading the army meant that this was the last fighting unit of the Western Front Army. It had obtained glory, but it was meaningless to its race. If not for the fact that this subordinate was transformed from a Lord of Hell, and was only good at charging and breaking through enemy lines and not good at manipulating magic stones, it would have been better to transform him into a high-level parasitic eye demon instead of being killed by the human's firearms. However, it was impossible for Sky Lord to say these words in front of another subordinate. Furthermore, the current situation was not Totolok's problem alone. No matter how brave and intelligent a general was, Without sufficient troops, it would be difficult for him to be of much use. He was the one who ordered the attack. And the one who limited the numbers of the Western Front army was the king. No, that's not right. The king had already given him enough support. The most hateful ones were Blood Conqueror and Mask. If the former could transfer more horns, and if the latter could follow the agreement and provide enough symbiotic demons, the result should be completely different. Hacksword couldn't help but clench his new hand that was already growing flesh. But would it really be completely different? The next moment, a lingering thought appeared in his mind. The Western Front army could indeed occupy the entire kingdom of Wolfheart if they doubled their numbers, but there was still the kingdom of Dawn and Grey Castle. How many more people did he need? All of them. Skylord blurted out. My lord? Siasis asked, puzzled. What did you say? Nothing. He shook his head. That's right, Osrook had already given him the answer. Give up the cities where the god's stone mines have been mined, give half of the land to the Skysea realm, and then put all the troops into the Land of Dawn. Not 10 times the current plan, but all of them, including the existing and new ones, will advance wave after wave until the human race is extinct. This was the conclusion of the subordinate he valued the most. Back then, all the senior lords thought that it was an unrealistic idea, but now it seemed that he could somewhat understand Osrook's thoughts. After hesitating for a long time, Hacksword made up his mind. He took a deep look at the motionless Nightmare Lord, got up, and walked out of the Red Mist Pond. My lord, where are you going? The top of the Birth Tower, Skylord said in a deep voice. I'm going to request the king to convene a Holy See meeting. The churning sea of mist and the Birth Tower in the center of the tower, which was filled with giant eyes, gradually appeared before his eyes. Seeing this scene, he heaved a sigh of relief. The Holy See meeting was usually called by the king. Not only did such an action cross the line, it would also incur the displeasure of the other senior lords. After all, not everyone was willing to enter the realm of mind where the king controlled everything. If it were in the past, Hacksword would also have instinctively resisted entering the presiding Holy See, but now he had no better choice. This was the only way he could convey his thoughts to the king and the other senior lords. Fortunately, the king did not reject his request. About a quarter of an hour later, the other senior lords appeared on the suspended seats one after another. It's you again. Hacksword, Blood Conqueror said in a low voice. I don't know what's there to discuss about the Western Front that requires the king to convene the Holy See. Don't tell me that what you're going to report is more important than the Nightmare Lord getting lost in the realm of mind? That's right. When Valkyries lost consciousness, you only reported to the king alone, Mask echoed. Now you're calling for a Holy See meeting as if it's something important. Don't tell everyone that your Sky City is about to be conquered by those worms. It wasn't easy for me to allocate a large amount of resources to nurture symbiotic demons for you. This guy was beating around the bush to shirk his responsibility again. Hacksword glanced at him coldly. The promised 5 times the number of symbiotic demons had only been delivered so far. Although the Skysea Realm's offensive had intensified, it was also a fact that they did not reach the agreed number. If it were in the past, he would definitely not miss this opportunity to attack the other party. But now, Hacksword did not even have the slightest interest in arguing. Enough! The king's voice sounded in everyone's mind. I believe that Sky Lord has his reasons for requesting for a Holy See meeting. It won't be too late for you to express your opinions after listening to it. Also, the eyes on the Birth Tower turned to look at Hacksword. The Nightmare Lord's loss isn't your fault. I have also agreed to send Silent Disaster to assist you in battle. Therefore, I hope that your report won't be filled with platitudes like complaining and asking for more troops. Otherwise, it will just be a waste of time. Hacksword immediately felt a great deal of pressure. He swallowed his saliva and braced himself to reply. Your Majesty, what I wish to discuss is indeed the situation of the Western Front's assistance. But it isn't just 1 or 2 troops or more horns, but... Skylord paused and looked into the king's bottomless eyes. The deity of gods. Chapter 1349. The deity of gods was the greatest masterpiece after the race's advancement. It took nearly 100 years and countless resources to finally achieve this miracle. It was seen as a huge leap in the race's control over magic power, and the only way to destroy the Sky Sea realm. The moment he said that, the Holy Sea fell into a brief and strange silence. For a moment, Hacksword wanted to take back his words, but when he thought about how the battle might end up in the most terrifying way, he held back his impulse. He had to take responsibility for the continuation of the race. After a moment, the king's monotonous voice sounded again. I remember we discussed this previously. You should know what the deity of gods means to our race. The hope of defeating the Sky Sea realm. Skylord nodded. But that's all. What do you mean by that? Blood Conqueror finally could not hold it in and growled. Let's not talk about the fact that we can use it to counterattack the Sky Sea realm after removing the restrictions on the floating monsters. Even if we use it on the Eastern Front, it will greatly reduce the pressure on the defensive line. And this means the lives and deaths of millions of our people and millions of warriors. You say it's all there is to it? First, your genius subordinate requested for the race to go all out, and now you want to deploy the deity of gods to deal with the insects. You sure are telepathic. Mask sneered as he looked at the people in the Holy See. I wonder what your thoughts are. Forgive me for not agreeing, Loathsome Heart said curtly. The other senior lords also expressed their disapproval. Only Silent Disaster remained silent. Hacksword had a premonition of such a situation. He knew that the matter was too important, and it was impossible to inform the king alone. This was also the reason why he decided to convene a Holy See meeting. If they could not reach a consensus, everything he did would be meaningless. The humans were now extremely similar to them after the first battle of divine will. Through the absorption of legacies, the race obtained unimaginable improvements. All sorts of new magic power technology spouted out, and every few decades, there would be a huge revolution. The rate of advancement greatly increased, and junior demons were no longer rare. The development of symbiotic demons allowed some inferior magic-less demons to become warriors, and the use of magic stones also became common in that period. These results were also reflected in the Second Battle of Divine Will. Even though the Sky Sea realm had been upgraded as well, it still took them less than 30 years to drive the humans out of the Land of Dawn. Now, fate seemed to be standing on the side of humans. Moreover, their speed of change was even faster than the race at that time. According to the nobles who surrendered, Grey Castle was no different from other kingdoms 10 years ago. The current king of Grey Castle, the fourth prince of the Wimbledon family, was not even worth mentioning. Thus, any hesitation or procrastination would only make the enemy stronger. It had to make everyone aware of that. The Western Front has been defeated. Hacksword took a deep breath. It could imagine what kind of expression Blood Conqueror and Mask would have on their faces. But for the future of its race, it had put its personal gains and losses aside. Although our race still occupies the territories of the two human kingdoms, we no longer have the strength to push forward. The stalemate means that it will be difficult for us to get the legacy shard in a short time, which is no different from failure. What did you say? Mask was surprised. That is an army of more than 100,000, not to mention the symbiotic demons. How could we lose to those worms? Are you lying to the king? Blood Conqueror opened its bloody mouth at the Sky Lord. Not long ago, you said that the Western Front was progressing smoothly, and that our race had successfully stepped onto human land. With the territory covered by the life floater, you are now telling me that we cannot defeat the worms? What a joke. Osruk once gave me a warning, but I did not take it seriously enough, just like how you are treating my warning now, it said slowly. After all, words cannot describe everything that happened on the Western Front. If you want to understand this, you should use your own eyes to see. Then Hacksword lowered its head to the king. Letting the king read its memory was something it had never wanted to do before. But now that it had taken this step, it had no other choice. As for those small, unintentional mistakes, the king should not take it to heart. The eyes on the birth tower opened at the same time, and a cold feeling surged into its mind. Hacksword forced itself to open up its consciousness, and silently recited its absolute loyalty to the king, allowing the undercurrent to flow through its body. The iron birds flying in the air, the rain of fire falling from the sky, the huge and bright fireballs, and the god's stone crossbow bolts shooting from afar. These scenes appeared one after another, as though it was reliving the battle with the humans. After the cold feeling disappeared, the faces of the lords became unusually ugly. Hacksword knew that they were the same as him. They had personally tasted the feeling of being ambushed by the humans, and being only a step away from death. Even the surging sea of fog beneath their feet had become much more agitated. Even though Osrook had previously reported the changes in the humans' weapons of war, no words could compare to experiencing it personally. There were no transcendence or magic power instruments. Just a group of magicless people piloting strange metal constructs, with the cooperation of a few witches, was enough to threaten the lives of the lords. Is that really something that the worms can create? Mask said in disbelief. I can't sense any presence of magic power on it. In fact, that is their unique characteristic. Hacksword knew that his only chance had arrived. The strength of the humans cannot be measured by the scarce number of witches, but all the magicless people should be included. Furthermore, with these things, the originally weak magicless people are no weaker than primal demons in terms of combat power, and can even pose a threat to junior demons and high ascendants. So, what are you trying to say? I want to ask everyone, even if you use the deity of gods, do you have the confidence to conquer the Sky-Sea realm within 10 years? The answer was undoubtedly no. The deity of gods was a necessary counterattack, but it was not the only condition for victory. The Sky-Sea realm was also an upgraded race, and no one could say for sure how much power they could unleash in their own territory. The original strategy was to defend the Blackstone region while devouring the legacy shards of the humans, allowing the race to reach a new level before using the deity of gods to destroy the Sky-Sea realm in one fell swoop. It doesn't matter even if I'm to blame, but the failure of the Western Front is a foregone conclusion. This is an unavoidable fact. Hacksword raised his voice. If we don't seek for change, not only will we not be able to counterattack the Sky-Sea realm in 10 years, we might not even be able to win against the humans. The final outcome will be the complete annihilation of our race with enemies on both sides. Is the deity of gods more important than that? That's just your own judgment. Blood Conqueror gritted his teeth. Of course not. Don't tell me you want to mention Osrook again. No. Skylord paused for a moment. I'm referring to Nightmare Lord. Since he had made up his mind, the small deception was for the sake of loyalty. At this point in time, he could no longer turn back. I'm not sure what clues Valkyries discovered in the realm of mind that caused him to abandon the front lines and choose to take the risk. But before he entered the realm of mind for the last time, Valkyries personally told me that he was leaning towards Silent Disaster's conjecture, that the humans had probably obtained some sort of legacy. Blood Conqueror froze in his seat. The one-sided situation in the Holy See had been stirred. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1350. Valkyries was one of the first to become a senior lord, so the weight of his words was naturally different. Only he was able to maintain a normal tone and attitude when speaking to the king, as though there was no difference between the two. More importantly, the king had never expressed any objections, which was sufficient to explain the problem. If it was the conclusion of the Nightmare Lord, it would naturally have a certain degree of persuasiveness. Furthermore, Hacksword had indeed discussed the possibility of human inheritance with the Nightmare Lord. Apart from not saying it personally, it was a reasonable inference. At the same time, he kept an eye out and deliberately placed the matter after displaying the memories of the Western Front. Perhaps the king would verify this theory while reading his memories, but it was unlikely that he would conduct a special investigation. The Bai King's consciousness was highly autonomous, and his judgment would only be based on facts. The purpose of these words was to shut the mouths of his opponents. Blood Conqueror's pitiful brain was unable to see the situation clearly, and could only respond instinctively. In order to shirk the responsibility, Mask would definitely not stand on his side easily. The other senior lords were basically wavering, and it was simply a joke to entrust the future of the race to them. As such, Hacksword spoke this small lie confidently and without any pressure. Backing down now would be the greatest irresponsibility to the race. He had to personally reverse the entire situation. What unknown inheritance? That's too unbelievable. Mask questioned softly. We have all seen the scene in The Origin of Magic Hall. If the race truly exists, then where is it located? Who can guarantee that the conclusion the race came up with is definitely correct? Hacksword vowed solemnly. I also do not wish to believe that humans can obtain the favor of fate, but their transformation is right in front of us. Don't forget, before obtaining the inheritance of the underground civilization, we similarly did not know that the fragments could be separated. You mean, Abomination seemed to have thought of something. No, I don't mean anything. My only goal is to guide you towards the self-constructed answer. Among the many ruins, if there is a fragment left behind. All the senior lords could not help but fall into deep thought. Except for Blood Conqueror. So what? I absolutely do not agree to use the deity of gods to deal with the lowlifes. The Skysea Realm's offensive is still increasing. Now that we finally have the chance to catch a breather, we should take the opportunity to consolidate our defensive line. Without the deity of gods, the Eastern Front will not be able to withstand the continuous intense battles. Once the army is defeated, more than 10 cities will be exposed to the enemy's claws. But this time no one agreed with him. Compared to a dozen or so cities, the future of your race should be your priority. Hacksword glanced at him expressionlessly, then looked at the birth tower in the middle of the Holy See. My respected king, losing the deity of gods on the Western Front will indeed worsen our current disadvantage, but at least it will not lead to the worst outcome. Now, time is not on our side. Humans are quickly absorbing the inheritance they have obtained. Since sacrifices are unavoidable, the next choice is the most important. Hacksword, that's my army. Blood Conqueror roared. Skylord turned a deaf ear to him. Everyone has seen for yourself how intricate the war weapons created by humans are. More importantly, the primal demons can use them as well. If our race can absorb their inheritance, and use the Fire Rain and Iron Bird on our army, we will be able to reverse the situation of the Skysea Realm. Even if we lose the entire Blackstone region, the final victor of the Battle of Divine will be us. Upon hearing about the fusion of new weapons, Mask's empty eye sockets blossomed with a flicker of excitement. The Blood Conqueror was furious. And these losses could have been avoided. Enough. The king finally spoke. I understand what you mean. Hacksword's heart was at ease. The king would not be affected by their dispute, and would only make a decision based on the actual situation. The other senior lords gradually became skeptical, and at least no longer opposed his proposal. This way, the consensus passed at the meeting could be quickly implemented. Otherwise, the dispute and shirking between the senior lords would waste a lot of precious time, and the pressure that the Western Front had exerted on the humans would be reduced to nothing in the indecisiveness. Although this was still a distance from the all-out that Osrook advocated, it was the best outcome that he could fight for. Furthermore, as the greatest masterpiece of the race, the deity of gods had a large number of troops protecting it, which was also a disguised form of support for the Western Front. When this ultimate weapon reached the Land of Dawn, all of the humans' tactics would lose their meaning. The Silent Disasters arrangements remain unchanged, continue to reinforce the Western Front. The king's calm voice echoed in the Holy See. Once the deity of gods is completed, set off for the human territory to seize the Legacy Shard. Shrink the Eastern Front to the south, and if necessary, give up a portion of the cities to reduce the losses of the inferior demons. Before the offensive and defensive situation reverses, they are also important resources. Understood. All the senior lords acknowledged the order. But Blood Conqueror is right. Delaying the Skysea Realm in the east, and devouring the humans in the west is the established strategy for the third battle of divine will. Now that we have no choice but to mobilize the deity of gods to the Western Front, it will cause the casualties of the Eastern Front to increase greatly. Sky Lord, do you feel that you are not responsible at all? In that instant, Hacksword felt an extremely cold chill crawl up his spine. In his field of vision, the eyes on the birth tower had all closed together, forming a gigantic eyeball. Compared to it, he was insignificant. Just the pupil alone was enough to contain several of him. The eyeball hung in the air and stared coldly at Hacksword, as though it could crush him into powder if it rolled slightly forward. Under such pressure, he could not even muster up the thought of opening the distortion door. In the presiding Holy See, the king was no different from a god. Although your abilities are important, it does not mean that I will overlook this point. This is the last accident of the Western Front plan. Do not disappoint me again or else. He did not need to use loud words to express his displeasure. The oppressive feeling that seemed to be tangible had already revealed everything. I understand. The eyeball suddenly disappeared, along with the Holy See. The spire of the Sky City, and the fog once again appeared in front of Hacksword. My lord, are you all right? I'm fine. Looking at Siases, who was standing guard beside him, Sky Lord shook his head slowly. He originally thought that he was prepared to endure everything, but when faced with the king's malice, the discomfort and resistance that surged up in his heart overwhelmed his expectations. These were just spontaneous reactions. Hacksword closed his eyes. Everything was for the sake of the race. He had already done his best. Chapter 1351. Grey Castle, City of Neverwinter. Roland could not help but clench his fists after reading the report sent back from the front line. What's wrong, Your Majesty? Nightingale, who was beside him, noticed his unusual behavior. No. Nothing. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. Everyone's performance exceeded my expectations. I'm just happy. Really? Nightingale was startled and then smiled. It seems that they're all working hard. That's right. Roland got up, poured 2 cups of chaos drinks, and handed 1 cup to Nightingale. They're really working hard. This was not a casual remark, but his true thoughts at the moment. If he had not been here in person, it would have been difficult for him to connect the current First Army with the frontier guards who used to hold wooden spears. The 8 days of high-intensity combat, the strategic retreat that still maintained the formation, the cover and cooperation of the air and ground combat, and the determination to actively seek the key to victory on the battlefield all proved how amazing the army's growth was. In addition, the strong cooperation of the Kingdom of Dawn, and the willingness of the migrants to stay behind to help the army logistics, also showed him the overall transformation of the human race. And what surprised Roland the most was Edith. Although many of her previous actions had already shown that she was extraordinary, this surprise could be said to be more than all the previous ones combined. Using the powerful carrying capacity of the steam-powered trucks, they carried out mobile warfare in the territory of the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and fully exerted the long-range and powerful characteristics of the fortress cannons, which vaguely resembled the style of the Battle of Lightning. Not to mention the initiative to evacuate the city, causing the enemy's stretched defense line to be full of loopholes, and then the high-mobility troops to attack the enemy's weak points. The First Army could eliminate a large number of effective forces of the demons with such a small cost, and stop their advance 200 to 300 kilometers outside the Red Mist area. The contribution of the Chief of Staff was undoubtedly the most remarkable one. Although Roland had talked with the Pearl of the Northern region about their views on the future form of war, and the evolution of the war situation with mechanical equipment, they did not talk about the specific types of equipment. The armored vehicles that he had high hopes for were still in the factory in the form of tractors. The fact that Edith was able to link it to a truck meant that her foresight was definitely ahead of the times. It was the combination of individual and collective strength that gave them this hard-won victory. The demons' actions were now firmly restrained, while the First Army's new soldiers and supplies were continuously being transported to the front line through the main artery. The strength of the two sides had become one of them losing, while the other gaining. When the accumulation reached its peak, the real counterattack would begin. Roland and Nightingale clinked their glasses lightly. At this moment, the power of humans seemed to be shining brightly. After finishing his drink, he returned to his desk. According to the usual practice of the First Army, The good news was followed by all kinds of problems. These were problems that only he could solve. For example, along with high-intensity maneuvers came heart-wrenching losses. The report placed this point at the top of the list. Due to the uncertainty of the battlefield, the longer the crew stayed around the faulty vehicle, the greater the risk. In a situation where they lacked tools and a repair environment, the two of them could at most deal with simple faults such as flat tires and water leaks. When it came to the suspension and transmission system, which were relatively easy to have problems, they were almost helpless. Therefore, after most of the steam-powered trucks broke down, they could only unload the Rubik's Cube and leave. Since the demons launched an all-out attack, the front line had lost as many as 15 trucks. If it was not for the need to maintain the operation of the north-south artery, Roland suspected that Edith would transfer all the vehicles to the Kingdom of Wolfheart. To improve this situation, the First Army not only needed a specialized support unit, but also needed to establish relevant repair and maintenance sites, just like the Air Knight. Field repair vehicles and trailers were undoubtedly also necessities to be included in the production schedule. Once again, he clearly felt that if he wanted to use these large machines on the battlefield, it was not as simple as just building them. The resources and money they consumed were simply not something a vassal kingdom could afford. In addition to applying for more steam-powered trucks, the higher-ups of the army also expressed a strong desire for 75mm field cannons and general-purpose machine guns. Various statistics showed that their addition would greatly improve the firepower of the First Army. If it was not for the large consumption of ammunition, they would almost be a perfect weapon. Roland was extremely moved by this conclusion of seemingly flattering but actually demanding money. He then approved the Army's application. At the end of the report, there was a handwritten letter from Tilly. He guessed that the contents were similar to the military's, either pressing for a special plane or requesting for more fire of heaven. "Brother, long time no see. You haven't forgotten what you promised me, have you? Now that the demon's offensive is gradually weakening, we should be able to get through this year's months of demons safely. I will take some time to return to Neverwinter and hope to see its true form." As expected, Roland could not help but hold his forehead. He knew it would be like this. Fortunately, the overall structure of the special plane was already in place, and he indeed needed Tilly to verify the feasibility of the new body. However, what she said next was very different from what he had expected. Tilly used a large amount of space to describe in detail the shortcomings of the fire of heaven in actual combat. She even suggested that the production of the fire of heaven should be temporarily stopped until improvements were completed. The biggest problem lay in the twin seats. After summarizing all the available Knight's summary and battle results, she found that out of the 65 devil beasts that could be confirmed to have been shot down, only one came from the back seat shooter. The reason was also very obvious. In close combat, the enemy did not need to bite the tail for a long time like the biplane. The Mad Demon's spear throwing was equivalent to a ballista with an elevation angle of -90 to 90 degrees, covering 270 degrees in front of it. As long as the distance was sufficient, it could completely attack from the top and belly of the fire of heaven. In fact, they often drilled into these blind spots, leaving the backseat shooter helpless. Even if the enemy was within the firing range of the machine gun, it was difficult for the shooter to determine the relative distance of the target in the air without any reference. In addition, it was impossible to predict the flight path of the plane, so the hit rate beyond 100 meters was pitifully low. Most of the time, the shooter would return after firing all the bullets without hitting a single enemy. Similarly, when the fire of heaven strafed targets on the ground, the back seat could only find a small window of opportunity to shoot when it was pulled up. However, the weight of the passengers, weapons, ammunition, and cockpit protection was real. At the same time, in order to adapt to flying, the two people in the front and back had to complete a full set of piloting training. This also made the backseat machine gun an extremely cheap decoration. Tilly bluntly mentioned in the letter that it was more like a design error. If the rear cockpit was removed, not only would the number of Night immediately double, the weight saved could also be used in other areas. For example, more fuel. For example, a small bomb. In short, even if there was no way to immediately produce the improved fire of heaven, They had to at least cover the back seat with a skin. Roland could not help but smile bitterly after closing the letter. He could completely imagine Tilly's appearance when she complained. Although he felt helpless at the wantonly criticism of his design, compared to the reference materials in the dream world, the former's actual combat summary was obviously more worthy of being treated. Just as he was about to dig out the previous blueprints of the Fire of Heaven to make changes, the phone with the administrative office label rang. Roland picked up the receiver, and Barov's excited voice came from the other side. Your Majesty, your Iron Tower project is completed. You're tuning in to the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.